On behalf of Cuts International, I, Purushinder Singh, welcome everyone. Thank you for taking time to attend our event this morning. To begin with, let me thank US Department of State, US Consulate General Kolkata, and US Consulate General Hyderabad for supporting us in this project, which is titled Defense News Conclave, Stories of US-India Defense and Security Partnership. Through this project, Cuts International is organizing a series of virtual and in-person workshops and on the important subjects of India and US defense and security partnership. The stakeholders includes journalists, storytellers, defense experts, defense industries, includes professionals and community leaders, among others. Following India's nuclear tests in May 1998, former US President Bill Clinton tasked the then Deputy Secretary of State, Straub Talbot, to start a series of discussion on strategic cooperation with his Indian counterpart, Jaswant Singh, and aimed to address and understand strategic compulsions and explore convergence. In addition to these efforts, US President Bill Clinton's visit to India in March 2000 set the countries on a new path of trust-based cooperation. This followed and ushered in a new era of positive diplomacy between the two countries, designating India as a major defense partner in 2016, signing off 4 foundational agreements and defense trade and technology partnerships growing, with both countries doing more military exercises with each other, all further cemented this partnership. Furthermore, both countries have recognized the shared interests, including the Indo-Pacific region, and reiterated for an open, free, prosperous Indo-Pacific region. The size of Indian economy has grown at a steady pace, so much so that as per a recent report by Goldman Sachs, by 2075, the size of Indian economy is expected to surpass that of USA and will be equivalent to that of China. All this has culminated in encouraging developments, including recognition of India as a comprehensive global and strategic partnership by the US ahead of the official visit of Prime Minister Narendra Modi to the US in June 2023. Furthermore, this partnership is anchored on a new level of trust and mutual understanding, and enriched by the warm bonds of family and friendship that inextricably link our countries together. During the recent G20 summit under India's presidency, India and the US reaffirmed their commitment to deepen and diversify their already expansive major defense partnership through expanded cooperation, including new and emerging technologies such as space and also artificial intelligence, as well as accelerated defense industrial collaboration, which includes joint production of joint engines among co-production and co-development. The leaders also commended the India-US Defense Acceleration Ecosystem, INDUS-X, team for establishing a robust collaboration agenda to harness the innovative work of the defense sectors in the two countries to address shared security challenges. Today, India is the only developing country that is member of the Critical Minerals Partnership, Artemis Accords, and Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technologies. India is also the only South Asian country to be part of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. The India-US relationship is poised to grow further in the areas ahead and the years ahead. Cooperation between the two countries strengthens US security, bolsters India's prosperity, and enriches American society. An enormous range of Americans have a stake in the US-India relationship and expects further progress in utilizing the full potential of US-India defense ties as it spans the scope of human endeavor from sea to space, from security to health, from energy to education. With a vision of India being a developed country by 2047, the US is going to play a major role in it. Towards further strengthening this partnership, this is the 4th in-person workshop of the series, followed by Kolkata, Jaipur, and Mumbai. And we are going to organize one more on 6th of February, that is going to be in Chennai. As we proceed with the series of workshops, we would have concrete outcomes which we would reflect in our timely reports and project deliverables. I thank the wonderful audience and distinguished speakers. I look forward to listening today to both these sessions that we have. With this, I'm pleased to invite Ms. Jennifer Larson, Consul General Hyderabad, to deliver her welcome remarks. Ms. Jennifer Larson is the Consul General in Hyderabad. She was previously Director and Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Office of India, Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Bhutan, and Maldives Affairs, She also served 4 years as the Deputy Principal Officer in Mumbai. Prior to completing a year-long course at the National Defense University in June 2016, she was spokesperson at the Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs. Ms. Larson served as the principal officer in Benghazi, Libya, and then acting deputy chief of mission in Tripoli. She has also served in Pakistan, France, Sudan, Jerusalem, and Lebanon. With this, ma'am, over to you.
Good morning. Thank you for the introduction very much. I mean, you covered so much, I think, of what has been happening in the US-India defense partnership over the past many years. But I remember very well being in Mumbai when we first announced the major defense partnership with India. And that was a major, major milestone in, I think, cementing our partnership here. Of course, the Artemis Accords being something that was signed in the past few years, something that I was also very happy to work on. I'm very happy to be here to be part of these defense news conclaves, and thank you to CUTS for organizing the event and inviting you all here and inviting me to come speak to you here. We work closely with the Indian government on some of our most vital priorities, and these include things that you had just heard about, but also in general terms, increasing mutual prosperity, countering the climate crisis, upholding a free, open, and secure Indo-Pacific, and maintaining a rules-based order grounded in international law with respect for human rights. And all of these things we're working on in multiple facets, to include with the Quad, which is something I'm sure most of you know about. But few areas of our bilateral relationship have seen as much progress as the defense relationship. Over the last 2 decades, the US has become a significant supplier of defense equipment to India and become India's largest military exercise partner. And I'm looking forward to Tiger Triumph, which is we'll be doing that in Vizag with the Eastern Naval Command just coming up in March. The bilateral defense trade with India has grown exponentially year on year. We were close to zero in 2008. And that's about 25 billion now at the end of 2023. And that's a remarkable, remarkable jump just in 15 years only. Several US aerospace companies have established partnerships with Indian counterparts, facilitating technology transfer and enhancing indigenous defense production capabilities, including some work that's taking place here in Hyderabad. Both Boeing and Lockheed Martin have set up joint ventures here with Tata, and I think we'll be hearing from some of their implementers as well today. And I've had a chance to visit both, and what an impressive array of production is coming out. And just the diversity also of the workforce, I have to say, is really something to be commended. The relationship, of course, is more than just defense sales. Together, we have taken steps to improve interoperability, and this includes the exercise I just mentioned, and coordinated and signed technical agreements to further expand India's access to high-end American defense technology. So increasing joint services cooperation is also demonstrated by the increase in US-India military exercises, as I mentioned, upcoming Tiger Triumph and Vizag. And these have helped our navies work effectively side by side in providing disaster relief for communities devastated by tsunamis or earthquakes or floods across the region. And in fact, it was one of the tsunamis that devastated the Indo-Pacific I guess it was almost 20 years ago, that first brought the Quad countries together in a joint effort to do exactly this type of humanitarian assistance. So the reason for the growth in trade and interoperability is because the Indo-Pacific is crucial to the future of both India and the United States. Our Secretary of State and our President both like to say that America is a Pacific nation. And what's interesting is sometimes the idea of the Indo-Pacific for both India and the US differs a little bit. We don't necessarily take it all the way to, say, the Eastern Africa, but we're doing more and more together in that area as well, as we kind of enhance the definition of what does the Indo-Pacific mean. The Secretary Blinken has also said the Indo-Pacific region will shape the trajectory of the world in the 21st century, and I think that's exactly correct. In May this past year, President Biden and Prime Minister Modi affirmed the commitment of the four maritime democracies of the Quad to advancing a positive and constructive agenda for peace and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific. The U.S.-India Major Defense Partnership has become a pillar of global peace and security today, just in the 8 years since it was first announced. Achieving the full potential of this strategic partnership from deep below the water to far above the atmosphere and across the vast scope of human endeavor in health, energy, education, and security is immensely consequential for all of us. And I want to thank the U.S. Consulate in Kolkata for supporting the workshop and for inviting us to be part of this as you take this really important work around India and finally up to Chennai and then to Delhi. And again, thank you to CUTS for implementing and to all of you for being here today and recognizing what an important evolution this is in our two countries' bilateral ties. So thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Larson, for your valued remarks and opening today's event. With this, on behalf of CUTS International, I would request you if you come at the center of the stage. Since we are celebrating our 40 years of establishment, we would like to present a memento, please. We're really pleased to have the first panel discussion that's on innovation and industrial bridge, US-India partnership. With this, the chair and moderator, Stuti Banerjee, Senior Research Fellow, Indian Council of World Affairs. Give her a round of applause, please. Now, among our panelists, Lieutenant General Anil Kapoor, Board Member, Technology Innovation Hub, Governing Body, and Professor of Practice, IIT Tirupati. Major General Pawan Anand, Head, Atmanirbhar Bharat Initiative, United Service Institution of India. A round of applause, please. Captain Sarabjit Parmar, Distinguished Fellow at the United Service Institution of India. I hope we all had a good breakfast. So people at the back, please, a round of applause. Praveen P.A., Director, Aerospace and Defense, Government of Telangana. And Harinder Sekhon, former Intelligence and Strategic Analyst, National Security Council Secretariat, Government of India. So with this, I leave the reins to our chair and moderator. To you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, and a very good morning to everybody. I thank CUTS for giving us this opportunity. And since we are here to listen to the panelists, so I will just get across to that. In terms of my introductory remarks, I will just say that India and the United States today are increasingly partnering with each other in the defense sector. And frankly speaking, a lot of these developments that are happening today, we would not have thought possible, let's say, about 2 or 3 decades ago. So we have the joint US-India Declaration of Defense Cooperation, the framework of the US-India Defense Relationship, the annual 2+2 ministerial dialogues, and other consultative mechanisms, which have made this defense relationship more advanced, more substantial, and we find that it has become a more comprehensive defense partnership, and in some ways signals a commitment of both partners to this. We are today partnering in joint exercises between our armed forces, have established working groups on issues ranging from cyberspace, critical technologies, quantum physics, undersea domain awareness, and maritime security, to now, as was said in the first session, talking about co-producing and co-development of major systems. To further expand on this strategic technology partnership and defense industrial cooperation, the Indian Ministry of Defense and the US State Department of Defense have launched the India-US Defense Acceleration Ecosystem in 2023. You have the initiative which builds on what the 2 NSAs talked about, Innovation Bridge, which looks at connecting US and Indian defense startups to come together and work in terms of partnership in the critical and emerging technology initiatives that have been launched by the 2 countries. Now, innovation cooperation is a top priority for this bilateral relationship, and this can be seen through the joint statement which was released by Prime Minister Modi during his visit in June 2023 last year, when the two partners affirmed, and I quote, "Technology will play a defining role in deepening our partnership," and called for the US and India to foster an open, accessible, secure technology ecosystem based on mutual confidence. And what is interesting is that this partnership is not just limited to business or government to government. There is an academic component to it as well, with collaboration between universities of the two countries, where they're working together to exchange best practices in defense innovation and commercialization. And collaboration in this sector is not just limited to hardcore defense issues, but how these technologies can be further brought into the day-to-day lives of our people. The initiatives in these sectors cover AI, next generation telecommunications, space technologies, biotech, etc. Now, with India, growing its own growing commitments towards playing a very prominent role in the international arena, including in the Indo-Pacific through the IPOI, SAGAR, and other issue-based partnerships with like-minded nations, it has ensured that any discussion on the region as well as on these issues needs to include India. With India set to host the Quad Summit sometime this year, it provides an opportunity to continue the dialogue on the ever-expanding nature of defense and of security. While there is a lot to say on what we are doing together, does that mean we have no divergences in this relationship? And it is here that I hope that our panelists will be able to tell us what are the likely limits that they see in this cooperation in the future. Do they see any gaps that need to be bridged? And more importantly, how do we go about bridging these gaps? What are India's expectations from this defense technology cooperation that we are talking about? And while we have often heard about what India's role would be in the Indo-Pacific, I hope our panelists here would be able to tell us what is the role that India envisages for the US in the larger matrix of the Indo-Pacific. With this, I invite our first panelist, Lieutenant General Anil Kapoor, to present his remarks. Thank you, sir. The floor is yours.
May I request you to thank you? Good morning, everybody. At the outset, I'd like to thank Mr. Kumshendra and Cuts International for inviting me for this very interesting seminar. It's indeed a privilege and honor to be here and speak on something which is very contemporary and futuristic in terms of the Indo-US playbook, as I'd like to call it. Move ahead, please. Move ahead. Okay. Now, let me start by saying that the Indo-US Comprehensive Global Strategic Partnership with future contours of strategic alliance is actually the hallmark of the 21st century, epitomizing mutual dependence, meeting mutual aspirations. All this in the light of the ongoing Cold War 2.0 between US and China and the hegemonistic design of China in the Indo-Pacific. The newfound robust partnership is based on shared democratic values, common vision of the rule-based global order with a free and open Indo-Pacific. That is the vision, and convergence of mutual interests, which is equally important on bilateral, multilateral, and global issues. Let me say that a long-term Indo-US marathon has begun, just as the 100-year marathon of China began in 1949. I dare say this happens at a time when defense and security is of paramount importance globally. We are seeing what is happening in terms of war between Ukraine and Russia, and of course, Israel and Palestine. And therefore, the center of gravity of this partnership is contingent upon three things to my mind. One, defense preparedness, wherein we meet our gaps, mutual gaps. I mean, there are gaps in the Indo-Pacific where India needs to chip in as well. So we look at a shared vision there, which results in domination, deterrence, and dissuasion. We look at creating a common operating picture a common intelligence sharing mechanism so that the common operating picture goes into real-time situational awareness, which is again a shared mission requirement. This brings to the fore the ISET initiative on critical and emerging technologies, which actually becomes therefore the hub around which all this will be achieved. And I'd like to call this ISET, or rather rechristen it as integrated support in critical and emerging technologies. They're not really an initiative. It is an integration which has to happen. Next. Okay. So if we were to look at this as a key deliverable, one way is to start from what is there today and move ahead to where we will reach. The other is start with the end in mind and get into deliverables and deliveries. I'd rather follow the latter approach, which is a design thinking approach. To my mind, there are three key pillars. We need to look at a product lens, we need to look at a skill lens, and we need to look at a research, design, development, and standardization lens to make this happen. So that's one very important facet. The second is we need to look at a program strategy. And what is the program strategy? We need to look at an Indo-US technology strategy. There has to be a joint technology strategy. After all, the critical and emerging technology is fairly vague, fairly undefined, and fairly exhaustive. So I think to make it inclusive, we need to have a technology strategy. We need to look at industrial collaboration, and I'll dwell on these a little ahead. We need to look at India as the Indo-Pacific MRO hub, looking at life cycle support from home to tomb. And then to achieve all this, we need three drivers: the ESG of a structure, enabling policies, and a program approach that I alluded to above. Next. Okay, let me look at this playbook a little more deliberately. Now, when we look at a product, we are looking at development. We are looking at capability development. We're looking at national development. And we're looking at mutual support. A lot happening in India, which could go there. Digital India is a big example. And a lot happening in US, which could move there, and we know it. Now, therefore, what we are looking at in the product lens is a fish with a fishing rod. So therefore, while we get the fish, there's a need to get the fishing rod as well. There's a need to look at state of the art, because that is where I think true value will come. The speed at which technology is transitioning today, if you got anything that is Y2K or before, I think you're already into obsolescence. And therefore, there's a need to look at it from this perspective. We need to look at, when I say capability operational gaps, we need to look at mutual aspirations, that we could look at leasing of military hardware for defined operations, pre-planned operations. And if we do look at procurements, we should look at it from the perspective of Make in India, just like it is made in the US. That means we should not have debates which are going on transfer of technology, whether it is transfer of design, whether it is transfer of process. I think in the newspapers, we keep reading these articles. I think it's wasteful in time and effort. Let's develop a robust structure where we make it in India as we made it in the US, and more of it if we do have any questions on this. The next is the skill pillar. Today, India has the advantage of a youth bulge, which is the demographic dividend. To quote some figures, the population of the US is 350 million. The population of Indian youth is 700 million, which is just twice the number. So that is the kind of youth bulge, that is the kind of demographic dividend that we have. And therefore, when we did a Skill India, it was with the mission of creating 700 million job-ready individuals, professionals to walk in India and abroad and make things happen, and it is happening. I think we need to make it an Indo-US skill development venture. And why do I say so? There is a huge technology differential in some of the futuristic, critical and emerging technologies. When we look at semiconductor mission, when we look at quantum mission, when we look at big data analytics, when we look at artificial intelligence, I think we can bridge this gap by doing some very meaningful programs, and I'll allude to it a little ahead. And therefore, what one is looking at is not brain drain, we're looking at brain circulation. That is to say, let's have student-to-student exchange programs. Let's have professionals to professional exchange programs, professors to professor exchange programs, where they come and they go. It's like a 5-year program or a 10-year program of focused intervention with meaningful outcomes, with meaningful impact. I think that will make the difference. That will also build huge amount of trust and confidence. It will be a huge confidence building measure. And the next is, we talked of Indus. I think it's a great initiative. Today, India is endowed with about 1 lakh plus startups, out of which 111 are unicorns with about 350 billion. And we got about 55 gazelles who would be unicorns in another 2 years. We got about 100 plus cheetahs who are going to be unicorn in the next 4 years. So that is the landscape. So one is looking at Indus becoming a deliverable program like the engine in Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I would recommend everybody to read about it. I think it's a great example of how you pick up innovation and scale it up to create the impact. And I think we need to look at that model in Indus to create the acceleration program, incubation and acceleration. The next important pillar is research, design, development, and standardization. And why I bring standardization is when you look at—
You have a minute left. Do you have a minute?
I'll close here and then maybe in the next session I'll come back. So let me just finish this, please. Give me a minute. So when we look at research, design, development, standardization, what one is looking at is when you have two national entities, there is a need to standardize so many things. So that is the fun thing. The second is, I think, one of the very successful programs run since 1950s in the US is under the aegis of DARPA. We also have our R&D setups in terms of ISRO, which has been very successful. DRDO, which has been, if I may use the word, selectively successful in large number of programs. We have CSIR. We have RDSO, which is a huge research organization of railway. So I think if DARPA could actually create the catalytic transformation bridge for a national R&D organization, it'll be a great way forward. So to summarize the first part of the playbook, one is looking at a product lens for capability development, a skill lens for harmonizing and harnessing the power of youth bulge, and a R&D setup to create a national R&D fervor on the lines of DARPA. And I think that kind of a mutual agreement, a strategic partnership, joint venture, call whatever, in effect will create the impact that we are looking at through this Indo-US deliverable program. Thank you. I'll come back again to cover the balance.
Thank you so much, sir. May I call Major General Pawan Anand for his remarks? Thank you. So you have 10 minutes.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to come and interact with fertile brains which have been working in the sector for and trying to take forward cooperation between the US and India, which is so vital at this stage.
Just a little background on myself as to where I come from. I'm from the Corps of Engineers, retired 4 years ago. Just leave it. During my service, I dealt with combat operations on the LC during the Kargil War, as well as in counter-terrorism operations later. But being from the Corps of Engineers, I'm a mechanical engineer. And I've also been in procurement appointments, which also took me to dealing with foreign military sales to the US. So I was in international procurements. Worked with equipment, which is both Russian and some other countries' equipment. So currently handling the Atmanirbhar Bharat initiative of the USI, where we try to take forward MSMEs, which are hoping to break into the defense ecosystem. So we bring them face to face with the concerned department of the military, Army, Navy, Air Force, could be paramilitaries as well. And I also look at the intersection between geostrategy and emerging technologies. So we are setting up a cyber center of excellence at the USI in collaboration with Cyber Peace Foundation. That's going to be one of our major way forwards. I've been asked to talk on understanding joint intelligent assessments. That's the first theme. And on the second theme, which I'll probably come to later, Suti, is on MSMEs and co-development and co-production. Much of it is also going to be covered, has been covered by General Kapoor, and I'm sure Mr. Praveen will have a lot to say on that. Well, understanding joint intelligence assessments, that's something which mostly int operatives would be talking about. And int operatives don't talk. So people at the tactical level, people who've been in it the way I have been, would probably come out and have some ideas which they can share, which are at the tactical level. But guys who've operated at the strategic level will certainly not come out openly about what they've been through until it's already 30 years down the line. So Dulat comes and speaks about it much later, 30, 35 years down the line, if you've kept track of Mr. Dulat. But there's a lot of extrapolation that few of us could do to see where this joint intelligence assessment initiative that is there now between the US and India is probably the direction in which it is heading. And that looks good, to say it from the start. So intelligence assessments by themselves, well, intelligence instills caution, it brings out secrecy, there is suspicion, but it also involves a lot of perseverance. There is a constant effort, constant painstaking effort. It could be dangerous. There's a lot of urgency involved at times at the last point of implication or contact, but there's a huge potency in intelligence. So when we talk about intelligence assessments, we are not just talking about information sharing, which is of course a major part of joint intelligence assessments, but we are also talking about sharing of assessments, which is processed information with possible outcomes that has impact on policy or on operations. Now, this has a very wide scope and the levels get very layered, you know. So we need to be very careful about just clubbing all of intelligence together. I think broadly we can look at intelligence as OSINT, open source intelligence, human intelligence, which is again very, very important and somehow gets a backseat when we come to the third part, which is tech-int. So there's a lot of reliance on tech-int today, which actually brings out hard data, but human is so essential because it brings in the human element which can corroborate what tech-int gives you. And without corroboration, intelligence is not intelligence, it's information. So we have signal intelligence, imagery intelligence, measures and signature intelligence, geospatial intelligence. So having been in LC operations and counterterrorism operations, at the tactical level, the intelligence is immediately actionable and therefore needs to be given to the actionable people in a specific time frame. And then you have strategic intelligence, which may have a longer time frame, but which has huge implications at a larger level. Now you can see the difference between the two, because that is where we are trying to cooperate with between the two countries. Well, let's take two examples. At the tactical level, what was strategic intelligence perhaps, but got converted into tactical intelligence, was reports which clearly said that the Chinese have made certain incursions across our LAC, or are likely to make those incursions. And as you all are probably aware of the incident a year or so ago, we received intelligence inputs from the US, apparently, which were actioned by us, and an incursion was stalled, or at least was countered up to a great extent. So that is strategic intelligence, which we have translated down to the tactical level. Do we have strategic intelligence sharing at the top level? We can never be too sure what exactly is happening. A lot of it gets a little mixed up, and I'll come to that a little later. And that's very important, because that is where actually the relationship will probably go further. So before I go into the main process, let's look at a couple of more things that we need to look at before we, what do we premise on before we look at joint assessments? We are looking at overlapping interests between the two countries. Are there overlapping interests? Well, certainly, more and more as the days go by. There has to be a minimal level of trust, so that we have, and that would be based on future common interests. So are there future common interests? Well, lots. And we could talk about it till the cows come home. Have we got a mechanism in place? Hopefully coming into place. And that is where we need to work on. Let me take it a little further, a slightly deeper dive. Overlapping interests. Current and future enduring interests. Is there a cultural understanding between our operatives at the strategic and the functional level? This cultural fit needs to be well defined and put in place. How is that going to happen? And this is not only at the intelligence level, it also happens when we discuss MSMEs, or we talk about putting together co-development and co-production. The cultural fit between us is what needs to be put in place. We may think that we have it, but it takes a lot to develop that trust amongst ourselves. And how does it happen? It happens only when we sit down together more often, when we have more cups of coffee together, when we talk about things other than exactly what we just came for. And that would build that cultural fit for all of us. Then there are leadership and functional level issues which come into play. I dare say at the leadership level, for the last 2 tenures of elections, both in the US and in India, we've had a very positive trend. That should translate down to the functional level. But problem usually comes at the bureaucratic and red tape level between our officials. And that cultural fit, that leadership push has to be given to the personalities which are working with each other. So it is the personalities which need to also have that fit amongst themselves. And then, of course, a robust mechanism with a layered in-sharing, int-assessment mechanism. Now, this, obviously, nobody is talking about, an open kind of a sharing which can happen between two countries. It probably never happens.
So you
But
have
can we have
left.
it? Yeah, but can we have it between the two countries in a protocol-based manner? That needs to be worked out. I'm sure there are levels which have been worked out, but can they be deepened? Certainly, can be deepened a lot. Now, overlapping interests, of course, are in the stability in the Indo-Pacific that we see for each other. We are looking at a free, open, inclusive, secure Indo-Pacific. We want sea lines of communications for our merchant shipping, which are common interests. Then, of course, we have the continental rivalry with the Chinese. How does that play into the US strategy? Would this offset that? I dare say not, but are there pressure points? Perhaps. Much will also come out from the Red Sea coalition, which seems to have come together. And we're trying to understand, I think those would be indicators as to what is going to happen in the Indo-Pacific. So we're all going to watch the Red Sea coalition and how it's coming together. At the moment, it's not showing very encouraging signs, if I may say that. How do we bring together trust? We have the Five Eyes system, which is a very closely integrated system, all English-speaking Anglophone countries. Now broadening up into Nine Eyes, non-Anglophone countries. Where does India fit into these? Or is there another layer where India would fit into? Well, we need to work that out, because if INT assessments and sharing has to be done fast, it has to be done with an amount of credibility, then there has to be a system in place where the protocols are established. Perceptions, of course, vary. The US may say that we still have a lot of dependence on the Russian equipment. We are getting weaned off from that. The Quad versus the AUKUS, are these competing kind of organizations as far as we are concerned? We have to remember the Ukraine syndrome. A lot of countries don't want to be where Ukraine is. So neither Taiwan, nor Korea, nor Japan, neither India would like to have the Ukraine syndrome. And all this would lead towards a leadership and cultural fit at the top. What can be done? Institutionalizing every layer of the joint intelligence mechanism. That is where we need to bring it together. And let's not forget technical coordination, cybersecurity coordination, communication coordination. It has to be constant. It's not a one-off thing. It has to be done on a minute-to-minute, day-to-day basis, because data safety and sovereignty issues need to be addressed as well when it comes to cybersecurity. So at the end of this little session, all I point out is there's a need for urgency for this mechanism to be put in place in a deeper way. Should there be reviews on a quarterly, monthly, 6-monthly basis? I think all of them. We need to meet more often. We need to meet not only by officials, but we also need to have, as we are doing now, academics, officials who have retired, think tanks, etc. But at the end of it, it has to be two-way. And that is the bottom line. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. May I call Captain Sarabjit Verma to make his comment?
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a privilege to be in Hyderabad out of the freezing cold and fog and smog of Delhi. And thank you for this. And Stuti, bang the gravel at 8 minutes so I can wind up in 2. Okay. One of the mandates given to me was to look at deterrent and mitigation strategies. So I'm going to concentrate on that and see that what is the path we have walked so far? Where do we stand as on today? And how do we process further? But a word on deliveries to deliverables. I'm sure you'll agree that there are two aspects that stand out when you look at working together and producing assets or taking assets. The first is quality. The second is affordability. Quality, no doubt, can come from transfer of technology from the US. But do remember that India is also a hub for software. A coalition of both can work wonders. Affordability in the sense that India has got an ample, trainable youth manpower. We can take advantage of that. And therefore, a coalition or a cooperative mechanism to produce high quality assets that can be affordable to nations across the world is something that we can look at. And that's something that I think is important to look at. But there are ghosts of the past that we have to get past. Now, whether they're the 71 or pre-71, 1965, and I dare say the developing ghost of the present, where there are certain allegations against India by Canada and the US. Is this a ghost that is going to dampen the cooperative spirit? And is it going to put speed breakers as the past has done? Even if that be the case, the US and India have managed to work together for many years, putting differences aside. And the best example I can give you is the differences in approach to UNCLOS. In fact, I think in November, there was a bill or something that was passed in the US that's looking at the US signing UNCLOS, which actually is a welcome step. But despite those differences, despite the US looking at India as a friend of Russia and India looking at the US as a friend of Pakistan, we put our differences aside. And today, we are a global strategic partnership. I don't think it works better than that. But let me look at it in two phases. One is the bilateral relationship, and one is this relationship subject to a multilateral environment. Under the bilateral relationships, let me take you back to 1992 when we had the first Malabar. Cold War just got over, doors are opening, we're shaking hands. We started with the exercise Malabar, which has now developed into what we see it as 4 nations. And just to share with you, in 2007, the second Malabar exercise, I was commanding the Sea King Squadron and I was on board Virat. 6 nations, sorry, I always correct myself. That is the Quad plus Singapore, and we had 1 Royal Naval Destroyer. 6 nations, 25 ships. You couldn't get it better than that. And we all walked away. It took us around 14 years to come back together. And hopefully it stays. But a point of caution here, we must put Malabar aside and not add it to the Quad menu. Perhaps we can work better under that way, but a little later. Because Malabar in 1998, when we made the Buddha smile for the second time, military to military relations and doors were kept open due to the Kick-Lighter proposals. It's a deeper relationship, which we understand that both nations had to work together. Post 9/11, 2001, Malacca State Patrols, where the Indian Navy actually escorted US high-value assets through the Malacca Strait, including their nuclear submarines. This goes back to 2001, and today we are looking at what? We're looking at 2+2, we're looking at military to military exercises, we're looking at assets coming our way, be it ICE, MH-60Rs, which have actually spread interoperability across the whole Indo-Pacific to nations who operate similar equipment. HADR has been spoken about, and today we're looking at the Quad guidelines on HADR. Speaking of Quad, there are many initiatives that have come about, but I think we are very slow in the uptake on some of them. And this opens some doors. For example, if we're looking at technology under Quad, then ISET itself between the US and India can perhaps raise eyebrows in the other 2 countries, is one. AUKUS, at that point in time when it came in. So my question is, then why leave India out? Then I take you back to the ghost of the 1960s, the 1950s, when we were looking at developing our own submarine arm, and we found the doors from the Brits and the US side closed, which forced us to go to Russia. So if you're going to look at defense industrialization, building equipment together, then you have to keep your minds open and open doors. But more or less on a bilateral scale, I would say that we've got a terrific relationship going. We are going to develop jet engines for our LCA, which is already an ongoing process. And then, of course, we have a number of logistics agreements. The repair of US ships. Now, these are not US naval ships. It's what we call auxiliaries. The proof of the pudding is when we actually repair a US naval warship in one of our dockyards. That will be the proof of the pudding, and we will see to how much we can stand up to international pressures that come our way. And I'm waiting for that day. Multilateral, again, what I said, the main issue is that somehow in multilateral environment, India-US relations tend to falter for many reasons. Perhaps it's India's closeness to Russia. We're not an ungrateful nation. Relationships with Iran. One example is perhaps in the Red Sea, where we joined the CMF, and now I think a year and a half back, as an associate partner. And there was no definition of an associate partner at that point in time, which meant that the doors for India were open to walk in. We have shied away from that part of the country, of that region, but we have come in today. And we came on board as a CMF around a month and a half back. But today, when the whole region is in crisis, we find nations are willingly trying to operate alone. Even US allies have withdrawn from the Operation Prosperity Guardian. India itself is operating singly. There are 2 reasons for this. Unlike piracy, which was a common threat, and obviously it was a non-state player, the present incident requires a more mature approach, a more open door approach, and a more acceptable approach of India's strategic autonomy and the manner in which the US will want to play out this game. As of now, the narrative is out there that there is not a cogent strategy in place as to what you want to do. We all know, as we did for piracy, that the solution lies on land. You can keep on shooting down drones, you can keep on shooting down whatever you want, but finally you have to go on land and quell the problem for where it comes. That will require some sort of strategization and a common acceptable approach by all countries in the region. The US and India are the two major countries in this aspect is what I would say. Another multilateral issue that can be taken advantage of is the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative. The US has recently come on board, and I think it's come on board the trade and connectivity pillar. But given the strength the US has, the capability the US has, it can actually support all 7 pillars. Stay in the background, give support, because the moment the US comes in as a main player, smaller nations tend to get overwhelmed. So therefore, they may not be willing to work. But the mere presence of the US in the IPOI is something that has been a shot in the arm, and I think that needs to be taken advantage of. How we do that is another strategy that can be developed between both the nations. So therefore, is trust still a factor?
So you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. In the multilateral environment, perhaps it is. We need to work to overcome the differences. We need to look at 3 pillars: stability, security, and peace. Work together. The angle of inclusivity must come in. My personal feeling is that India says an inclusive, open, and free Indo-Pacific, but the word inclusive is missing from most of the US approach. Today, after many years, we are seeing France, Australia, even Japan accepting inclusivity. Inclusivity has to be there if you're going to operate in the Indo-Pacific. Otherwise, it will again just sort of stagger and stumble. And that, I have a feeling, is where the Quad is heading right now, because the minilaterals have overtaken most of these broad discussions. So I2U2 is one good example where India and US can work together with UAE and Israel. It's a very strange combination because among the 4 nations, India is the only nation who has actually signed and ratified the UNCLOS and the 2 implementing agreements. Another interesting factor whether you look to it. There's a recent book by David Bayer, 4 tests. The 4 tests that US needs to cross to keep US good and strong. I just started reading it. It was, I think, released a month and a half back in the US. Your ambassador was present there. So David Bayer says that the US needs to look at 4 factors: scale, investment, identity, and fairness. I'm still reading the book. I've just got past chapter 1. I think there's a lesson for both the US and India in this. Inclusivity is one aspect I've given. Understanding Indian requirements, reciprocity by India on what is the US requirements. And I'll just close here with food for thought. And I don't know how many of you are, are friends of or are fans of Kissinger, but I love the statements he makes. And one he made just before he passed, he says that to be a friend of the US is dangerous, or the enemy of the US is dangerous. To be a friend is fatal. I think that is a statement that needs to be disproved by both the US and India. Then perhaps we can look to a better future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Now I call Mr. Praveen PA to give his remarks. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a privilege to be here and again with all these stalwarts to kind of share my views. In fact, I'll come down from the stratospheric level where we have been discussing strategy to see what it matters for the industrialization and the MSMEs and job creation and investments, etc. How does this pan into? So I recently had a chance to visit multiple US OEM sites. I'd been to the Lockheed facility, the Collins facility, and multiple others rather, and got a real sense of the need of the hour, because I found that a lot of these OEMs are now struggling on the supply chain front, one, and which may or may not have come, the gravity of which may not have kind of really percolated down, but it's real problem there because during COVID times, a lot of the smaller suppliers have died down. A lot of the employees who were let go refused to come back. So there is a crisis there, which I think India is in a beautiful sweet spot to kind of really fill in and then support. One is that. Second, India is increasingly getting into this indigenization mode, the Make in India, the restrictions which is there, which necessitate that the indigenization content of any supply which a US OEM is planning to kind of really supply need to be increased. Now, probably there may be reservations with respect to the core technology, but there are a lot of other areas where the Indian MSMEs, the IT firms, the electronic manufacturing firms, etc., can support towards this indigenization goals. And that is one reason why the US OEMs have been aggressively increasing the supply chain base. In fact, they're doing a lot of campaign. If you were to look at it 5 years or 10 years back, for an MSME in aerospace and defense to get into the OEM supply chain, big hurdles, and the learning curve was quite steep, and the time taken was quite long, and many of them really hadn't tried. But those who tried really got. In fact, only the biggies like the Tatas and the Mahindras, or for that matter, Adanis or L&Ts and Godrej's managed to get the large ticket orders. But today, fast forward 4-5 years back, today we have recently seen the listing of Azad Engineering, who is also a supply chain partner of Boeing, just 2 years back. And 2 years prior to that, they were a very small company. So the growth of the MSMEs in the country are spectacularly, quick. And in fact, the advantage which Hyderabad has apparently is that we have close to, our statistics says 1,000 MSMEs who are dedicated into aerospace and defense in various tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 levels, of which probably 200 of them may be really serious players who are mature enough to take on technology. Because one of the main botherations or complaints that the OEMs give when they're insisting on the tech transfer is that the industry is not mature enough to kind of absorb the technology. But this is a hub which for the last 40-50 years have all the DRDO and the DPSU establishments here, which has nurtured a large number of smaller MSMEs. Today, many of them are really large and probably offering products which are competing with the global OEMs. So we have an ecosystem which has been doing military grade manufacturing for probably 3-4 decades. And that's again another important point, because unlike auto manufacturing, the ethos of aerospace, defense, and space manufacturing is zero error, high value, and obviously it's like the volumes are quite low. So you need to kind of really have a holding period, and you need to also have the technology provers as well as trained manpower to really get into and make big in this industry. So Make in India, again, while the government is progressively increasing the number of technologies which are restricted for domestic supply, we don't have enough Indian industry right now capable of kind of really gearing up and then doing that. And that is a great opportunity for the US companies, US OEMs, as well as the supply chain partners to form probably tech transfers, probably joint manufacturing, co-development, etc. Because increasingly, a large market which is available to all of them is now shrinking. And unless and until they kind of transform the way of operating and then get into active partnerships, this market itself will become a little bit more inaccessible in the long run. I think a lot of the OEMs are now doing that. We have seen Boeings and the Lockheeds, etc., aggressively moving around, trying to identify partners. And that's something which even the state, in fact, that's the reason why aerospace and defense has been a prime industry for Telangana. And for the last 7-8 years, I think we have made substantial progress. If for the Make in India, if you really want to see Make in India, almost all the US OEM says come to Hyderabad. Because nowhere you will see a Boeing manufacturing unit. Boeing, and that too, they're manufacturing the Apaches, the Chinooks, and the prestigious programs like for Lockheed's, again, F-16 wings are built here. The C-130J empennages are built here, and these are single source supplies. So we have established ourselves as a very trusted as well as something which has got a vintage in doing things. And so the supply chain partners of the OEMs are also now moving in there. Again, what the government is doing for supporting the industry, we create dedicated aerospace parks. So that's infrastructure side, policy-wide, we have an aggressive policy of attracting the investments, for all the mega projects, which the, any of these programs, we kind of offer customized tailor-made policies, which is fairly aggressive. And that's the reason why we see a large number of these investments coming to India, despite there is push for corridors and other, reasons. The government also has been focused on increasing the skilling partnership. So we do have OEM partnership for skilling. We have Center of Excellences with OEMs and were created. Besides, the state has entered into partnership with the global universities like Cranfield University, Embry Aeronautical University, US. Basically, wherever the OEMs are there, we try to kind of get their skilling partners to have the same training available in Hyderabad at probably Indian rates. And we obviously have a large number of trained manpower from the huge industrial base already out here. So any country coming in will not face a problem. So our industry is able to quote much better rates, and the reliability, the factor is quite high, and that's something which is certified by most of the OEMs. And one more thing, sir, in fact, both Lockheed and Boeing had said that during COVID period, the support which the state government has provided in allowing them to manufacture critical parts and helping them to transport the manufactured parts across 3 borders with police escort was highly appreciated. And today, almost all of them acknowledge that Hyderabad is the most resilient supply chain hub for them. So in this respect, in fact, the geopolitical reason why a lot of investment comes here is also alluded to earlier. I think we have, from a state side, approached most of the OEMs today, and frequently are in also touch with the tier 1, tier 2s of the OEMs as well, and try to see how we can promote the Indian opportunity, both in the civilian aviation space, the defense side, the space side, as well as the emerging tech side. See, there are certain technological gaps when it comes to aviation, for that matter, but then we are at level playing field when it comes to the emerging tech like the UAVs and 3D printing, etc. I think we are more or less at the same level. So there's a lot of opportunity for collaboration in terms of R&D, in terms of finding the production partners, in terms of even finding opportunities. Because, say for example, for UAVs, we have the first state to come up with their drone policy. We also had facilitated a lot of state-promoted pilot projects to do validate use cases for UAVs for mass adoption. Similarly, space, I think we were one of the first state to come up with a space tech policy. We have two of our well-known space startups, the Skyroot Aerospace as well as Dhruva, are the poster boys for the Indian private sector space today. So I think the state, as well as has kind of really tried a lot to push. And I would also like to thank the US consulate as well as the US team, because there's been consistent effort from the US side to kind of promote the industry. We had hosted that. I mean, there was the 2+2 business meet was hosted in 2018. Then the US consulate has also promoted innovation programs, through Nexus Venture Partners, that was there for twice they did it here. And they've brought in a lot of foreign delegations, as well as the senatorial, delegations, with a focus on trying to kind of build partnerships with the various aerospace clusters in the US. I think that is something which we really need to look forward to, cluster-based partnership with the hubs there. Yeah, so that is something which will kind of further, if a broad level understanding at a government to government level can help the industries talk more, collaborate more, and then, come out with joint programs which will kind of further the next level of US-India partnerships. So, I mean, this is something which what I thought I will share. And yeah, another aspect is obviously capacity building is required. So training on the ITAR side, the SCOMET requirements, etc., may need. In fact, a lot of facilitation is already available. We may need to kind of really do a little bit more to kind of popularize the opportunities available for the industry and get the both sides talking. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. May I call Ms. Harinder Sikon to make her comments? Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you so much to CUTS for giving me this opportunity to reach out to an audience outside of Delhi and Washington. It's nice being here, and as was mentioned earlier, to be away even if for a day from the chill of Delhi. Being the last speaker is not easy because the mandate given to me is to speak about joint strategy, but mainly focus on the shared security concerns. So after you all have heard about, what is happening now and the way forward, you might find that my topic takes you back a little bit to a historical evolving background about what brought India and the United States together. Of course, I'll try and focus more on joint strategy, but we cannot talk about that without talking about shared concerns. Now, when it comes to shared concerns, I think we all The China factor has been talked about. I mean, I've divided it into, I find, 6 main shared concerns which led to this current dynamism in US-India relations. One, of course, is the rise of China and China's continuous assertiveness and the desire to evolve as a dominant global player, not just economically, technologically, but militarily as well. I remember when 20 years back when I was in the NSCS and there would be these meetings that we need to do something counter China technologically and how China's perfected the art of reverse engineering. And could India do something like that? So China has encountered challenges. I mean, we do not know the state of its aircraft carrier. They've put it on, but is it as effective as they would like us to believe? But the fact of the matter is we're still talking about reverse engineering. And I think this, the recent agreements with the United States would help us move forward. So the China factor definitely made India and the United States look towards one another and leading to a reconfiguration in both our governments, both our administrations successively. Despite whichever government comes to power, I find that there is an across-board desire to move forward and strengthen this partnership. The second is shifting alliances. The traditional alliances and partnerships, in this rapidly changing world, those are under stress. We've moved beyond the bipolar world, unipolar moment, all that is behind us. And what now we find in this multipolar alignment, each one is trying to find a little niche and carve out a place for itself, each country. What we've seen more recently is Russia and China getting increasingly close. There is a strengthening of the strategic partnership despite distrust in Central Asia. I mean, Russia is not comfortable with what China, they've got competing interests in Central Asia. But I think the more the Ukraine has made Russia and China move closer together, and we find that there is some kind of an arms supply mechanism which has evolved, not just with China, but even, reportedly from North Korea. So that could be a dangerous precedent. But fortunately, India has, the external affairs minister's visit last week has set a lot of minds at rest that India-Russia relations continue to maintain their steady strength. So while the United States, for its part, has also had a relook at its NATO partners, there was a feeling amongst NATO and the Atlantic Alliance with the UK was under stress. Because it was felt that the United States is looking more towards the Indo-Pacific at the cost of its European partners. But I think the Biden administration had started focusing towards strengthening the NATO partnership and strengthen existing alliances. And what has happened in the Middle East, it's good that the US was already paying attention to this region. Multilateralism, I think Captain Parmar has already talked, but I think multilateral institutions and framework have faced challenges as countries continue to assert their own interests and pursue their own alternative approaches. The US, we need the US. The US is part of a lot of multilateral alliances, fosters a lot of multilateral alliance mechanisms. But at the same time, we find that it is also a little skeptical about some of them. And India and the United States do not agree on everything at the multilateral platform. But bilaterally, we have decided to move ahead. Not that we agree on everything bilateral, but I think that's good that we have this healthy disagreement between us. And we speak very frankly with the United States, which is a far cry because over the last 20 years, I've noticed that, earlier we were very diffident, but now we put our differences across. So, so while self-interests dictate actions and policies, but there is the need also to have some kind of an understanding and move together and collaborate. Then we come to the regional power rivalries. You have them spread across board, the Middle East, Europe, and East Asia. Now, these geopolitical tensions have triggered conflicts in, all over the world, and piracy is once again a serious challenge, which we thought was, taken care of. So I would not want to, in the interest of time, so we really need that, that there is the need to collaborate and find solutions to these problems in the Middle East and Eastern Europe, and resolve the territorial disputes. Easier said than done, because I think the Chinese assertiveness shows no sign of abating. Coupled with this has been technological advancement, particularly in areas like artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, space exploration. These have all changed the global landscape. The experts have already gone into into ISET and all. But as countries vie for technological leadership and developing strategies to harness these emerging technologies for economic and strategic advantages, there are both positives and negatives to this kind of a development. And I think there's been a lot of discussion about AI on how it's positive, it is required, but at the same time, AI can be a very challenging matter as well. So, I think so these competing interests dictate that democracies get together and find a common ground to address these global challenges and the challenges to the technological development, because it's happening. And here again, there was China, which was ahead in the space race, but fortunately, the US and India together have decided to tackle this challenge, and they're moving, and in India's Mars mission, etc., is very heartening. So when it comes to shared global challenges, coming to the non-traditional aspects like climate, pandemics, terrorism, and migration, these also impact the stability of the world, and has necessitated greater international cooperation amongst democracies and amongst like-minded countries. These challenges have actually highlighted the interconnectedness of nations, because these challenges are common challenges, whether a country is developed or developing, and the need for collective action to address them in a more effective manner. So what we find is that amidst a changing global order, India and the US felt the genuine need to advance cooperation, overcoming a lot of trust issues, technology transfer issues, and decided to move ahead.
Ma'am, you have a minute left.
1 minute? Yeah, I'll finish the first part and then, yeah. So the more recent developments, what really happened was when the Prime Minister went and the GE announcement was made, the jet engine technology, transfer of technology with India, 80% technology would come to India, has been a very bold attempt by the United States to share or go into the co-production mechanism with HAL in India. So what we've noticed is that the joint strategy which India and the United States are looking at is that there should be no gaps and there should be a continuity. Making the two NSAs the points person of this technological cooperation and transfer. The US and India hope that this would drive, there would be continuity, and there would not be none of that, the stop, start, and have hiccups and derailments in the middle, because earlier we found gaps whenever there was a change of leadership, and this becomes more relevant because both countries go into an election mode in 2024, and it is hoped that this mechanism of making the two NSAs would ensure a smoother transfer to the next whichever government comes, because there would be a points person to take on this momentum. And I think since 2012 and more so after 2020, the Galwan incident, India has taken the China threat more seriously, has decided to overcome some of its own hesitations in moving ahead with the United States. So in certain matters, the US does see the India's Atmanirbharta as a challenge to this procurement process, the FMS route and all. But I think the recent road to ISET has, and the steps which have been enunciated has set minds at rest in both countries. And what we see is that there has been unprecedented public-private partnerships in semiconductors, advanced telecommunications, quantum computing, civilian space technology. So I think with these task forces having been put and a mechanism established, I think the US-India strategy seems to be to ensure continuity beyond 2024. I'll come to the rest when I speak again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. So we will now go into the next round of our panelists giving their specific points on what they have in mind in terms of taking this relationship forward. So all the panelists have 5 minutes, because we would then go into a question answer. Maybe we can expand on your ideas then. We will go in the order that we started with. So you're the first.
Okay, so we looked at the first pillar, which was product, skill, and the R&D setup. Now, let's look at the programs. But before the program, I'd like to quickly walk through a very, very interesting story, the Indian Integrated Guided Missile Development Program. This program, as you all may be aware, came into being in 1984, when India wanted to be self-reliant in missile technology. And close on heels in 1987, the Missile Technology Control Regime was slapped on the have-nots, but that didn't deter us. And today, through various indigenous mechanisms of academia interface, academia industry interface, academia industry user government interface, all these mechanisms were created through the through government intervention, and we had a very robust missile program which continues to deliver today. And not only that, close on heels, Russia and India signed a BrahMos agreement, and today we have the BrahMos missile system, which is a sterling example of Indo-Russian, should I say, future. In a similar vein, we would like to see 1984 and 2024 are different points in history. Today, we are a resurgent India. And therefore, how we would like to look at this Indo-US relationship is a relationship of viability, of relationship in which there is huge amount of mutual trust. And with that, I go to the three pillars, next three pillars on programs. The first is a technology strategy. I think there is a need to build a technology strategy. We need to do a very clearly spelled out TRL mapping. Which are those technologies into the future, which are TRL 1 to 3, where academia primacy between India and US is warranted? Which are those technologies which are in the realms of TRL 4 to 6, which is academia industry interface of the two countries? And which are those which are 7 to 9, where, like I said, industry of the US can actually come and make in India? And therefore, we need to spell this out very clearly. We have to look at a consortium approach, the BrahMos model as well. And then we have to look at government to government, government to corporate, government to academia kind of interfaces. And they should be very free-flowing. In addition, since technology obsolescence is a given today, given this fast-paced technology, And I'm sure the digital world will very soon be replaced by the quantum world. And therefore, there's a need to look at a formal technology management mechanism. I'm trying to get into the to-be state so that we are able to harness the power of the future. Then we look at Indo-US industry collaborative arrangements. Now, I'm aware that the World Trade Center in the US has come to India in a very big way. And close on heels, we're going to have the WTC UTA coming to India as well for creating the future Silicon Valley in that place. And it's a very welcome step to look at India, US creating the future Silicon Valley at both the places maybe. So therefore, I think these kind of initiatives in the industrial corridor, in the defense industrial corridor are welcome. And like was brought out by Mr. Praveen, we do have a turf which is ready, but definitely a lot more needs to be done. And we need to look at smart manufacturing. I think that is where the future lies, again, in terms of capability development. And then we need to look at business readiness level, like the technology readiness level, to take business interests forward. So can Indo-US hub in India be the export model which the US industry has? The answer is yes. And that gets me to the next pillar, which is a sustainable supply chain. And when we look at a sustainable supply chain, we have to look at the womb-to-tomb management of technologies, the womb-to-tomb management of equipment and products. And therefore, India, I think, is well poised to become the MRO hub for the Indo-Pacific. And we've already heard examples where US is wanting to use India as a logistic base, as a MRO base. I think it should become part of the Indo-US relation in life cycle sustenance support. The next three drivers are on putting all this together. If we have to do all this, the first thing is we need to look at an ESG structure which can deliver. We have to look at a regulation mechanism. After all, there are two countries. There'll be industry interests. There'll be industry complementing and competing. And how do we regulate that? That's very important. We need to look at. We need to build joint ownerships. We need to build enabling policies. The policy document has to be relooked at. I think that playbook is very important because when we look at an enabling policy, we have to look at jointmanship going to an integrated approach. The word is integration. Initiative on CET must become integration of CET, critical and emerging technology. I think that will be a best way forward for both the nations. And last but not the least, a program approach would be the best. We look at a large number of programs. IGMDP was a great program. It resulted into Indo-Russia relationship in BrahMos. I think if we follow a similar model on program approach in quantum, in semiconductors, where mission already exists, in Skill India, in Startup India, this program will yield very many dividends based on goals, KPIs, and if I say meeting mutual aspirations. Next.
I'm sorry, sir, can we wrap up?
I'll just quickly bust up to the, yeah, I'll just conclude. Yeah, please move fast. Next, get to the next. Yeah, okay. So to summarize, I'll summarize in just two slides. You have to give me 1 minute. Now, if we look at the red ball in between, it is the threat landscape. What is the threat landscape? It is hybrid, it is gray zone. And we have the sustainment development goals beyond all hybrid warfare. I mean, that is where development also lies. So therefore, it's a big ticket. Then we have the invisible warfare, or what is being also called the irregular warfare, going in space, in cyber, in information, disinformation, misinformation, all put together. Then we have the subconventional threats of terrorism and conventional wars, which have, after a long time, manifested back last year. So really speaking, what we need to look at is connectivity, a common connectivity platform, a common protocol. And I'd just like to highlight C7 ISR, something that China has done today. And it's a huge enabler. And it is command, control, communication, computers, cybertronics, cognition and combat. And when you say cognition, looking at artificial intelligence built into big data for a decision support. We need to look at lethality. And when we say lethality, today information is a big lethal weapon, much more powerful than the sword. Stealth is a great technology. And firepower may not become the dominant vector in the future. So really, we have to look at that. We have to look at a transition from automation to autonomy, with quantum coming in and large number of other tech coming in. I think we need to look at the congruence between semiconductors and software, which will bring this change. And the fourth pillar is sustainable relationship with agile integrated supply chains, which are so important, and a strategic readiness at all times. And we need to define for ourselves, what do we mean by strategic readiness? Next and skip next, come to the next. The last one now. So therefore, the future paradigm is about 4 terms: automation, autonomy, precision, positioning. They will define the future. And the deep tech landscape is shifting between dominant vectors and supportive vectors. I mean, today firepower is a dominant vector. Tomorrow, information is going to be a supportive vector. And therefore, we have to look at a disruptive technology stack. And I'll not highlight since it is all there. We have to look at an unmanned autonomous system, which is dual use today. I mean, it is a huge enabler. Land, sea, low Earth orbit, outer space, everywhere you have, and therefore you got manned, unmanned technology system, the MUMTS. And that's where the future will lie. And therefore you have to look at mechanisms which will counter it. Space is going to be a major game changer by 2040, 2050. And that's where we need to synergize our efforts. India, as it is moved very well in terms of privatizing space agencies, in SAT communication, in rebuilding ISRO, which was already doing very well. And therefore, we have to look at space domain awareness, space situational awareness, and see how we can harness space as a future paradigm of warfare, both in the kinetic and non-kinetic domain. And therefore, what we really need in essence is a whole of nation approach. And when I say nations approach, it is the Indo-US approach. Thank you.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we're running short of time. So what we will do for the rest of the panelists is mix up with the questions that from the floor, and then they can also expand on the remaining points that they have. I hope that's okay with everybody. We're going to take 3 questions at a go, and if the people in front can kindly sit down because I can't see beyond you. भैया कैमरा वाले आप थोड़ा नीचे बैठ सकते हैं. So please.
Good morning, everyone. My quick question to Pavan. Sir, how do you build a cultural fit? How do you build cultural fit than what is actually existing now? What's your thought leadership on it? Number 1. Number 2, question to Captain Sarvajit Parmar, sir. Sir, you have identified many points I have heard. The first point I would like to put you, how do we penetrate into deep into the Quad in association with the United States of America? And at the same time, because Quad has a other alternative also. So since we talk about United States India all the time, we talk about a lot of valued partnerships, shared values. So values on one side and strategic hardcore realities on the other side. How do you bridge those gaps? Last question to another man. Ma'am, this building this comprehensive national security strategy, we are somewhere down the line missing building a human security approach. Unless and until you have the grassroots human security approach, national security challenges cannot be completely, taken care. So that's the wisdom coming from United Nations, Kofi Annan. So last question to my dear friend from Telangana, Praveenji. To what extent the local population has been embedded into the defense and aerospace sector in terms of employment? Unless and until you have the grassroots collaboration, cooperation, you will not have the overall development. So is it only a superficial state-centric approach to defense sector, or Is it all the way coming from the grassroots cooperation? What have we been doing as a country social responsibility? Thank you. I'm Dr. Ramesh Nandiyati, Founder Executive Director, Center for Human Security Studies, Hyderabad.
Is there any other question from the floor? We're taking 3 at a go. Oh, all right. Yeah, Kanika. Yeah, go ahead.
Actually, even before touching on our point on the bilateral relations in the growth between India and US. I heard that it may be also because India and US are also strategic partners, not alliances. So in a bilateral relationship, a partnership can work well, but that may sort of fall through on a bilateral platform. So this is sort of sharing mindset. Thank you.
I'll take you on the next round. There's a gentleman behind you.
Could you speak louder, please? I think the mic is off.
Am I louder enough?
Yeah.
Can you also come in front? We can't see you really. Yeah, you can. Please. That would be perfect.
So I'm from the Department of Political Science. So my questions will be more related to politics of it. So according to National Security Guidance document of US in 2021, the key elements that were highlighted as far as whole Indo-Pacific politics of alliance was concerned was to focus on the democratic and plural societies and supporting investigative journalism and independent media, and also to kind of purport scientific and critical thinking. Now, my question is, do you think that domestic Indian electoral politics could be consequential, or if not, is resilient to achieving these geopolitical ends between US and India?
Question is addressed to.
Just repeat the question once again.
My question is that is India's domestic electoral politics is playing any consequential role in achieving the Indo-Pacific geopolitical ends? Given the fact that the key elements that were highlighted in National Security Guidance document in 2021 of the US focus on democratic pluralism society, supporting investigative journalism, independent media. Right now, it's standing kind of antithesis to what is happening in India's domestic politics. So that is my question. I have a second question, but I can ask.
Sure. So we'll start with you, ma'am.
Okay. I think I think there are 2 questions. One is on democracy and the other one is on human security. In fact, that is what I wanted to address in the second part of my speaking engagement. So I'll just recap those points which I needed to bring. I agree with both the questions, and when it comes to the implementation and the way forward, I think both India and the United States would have to manage expectations and implementations, and there's going to be the cost factor for India. I mean, I'll leave out the strategic part, or maybe but I'll come to what I felt, because the Indian economy, the economic challenges, despite our rate of growth and everything, we know that there are economic challenges, inflation is high, and the rupee dollar disparity, which is increasing, is a challenge in any procurement process which needs to be addressed. And the rupee is weak internationally. So both leaders, I mean, I talked about it, go to the polls in 2024. So domestic priorities will take precedence over, what we want to do strategically or globally. Because I think the human security, I mean, that is a major challenge, not just for the UN to kind of raise it for us. I think we ourselves are aware that we need to bring, and that is why the Modi government has come up with these policies of, Atmanirbharta Bharat or Skill India. But unfortunately, it may be the sheer numbers of our population, we've not been able to match it with the aspirations of the government. So we really need, because I remember when I was a child growing up, we had a lot of these, not ITIs, industrial training institutes, which were at the state level. Somehow they have fallen and disappeared along the way. And this was something which was a very aspirational thing in the 1960s. And it's just off the radar. So is this government, I mean, it's all very well to talk about high technology, Skill India, but we really need to have these centers at the district level and the sub-district level, because I think human security, till we cannot guarantee security for our people, the government is trying, but it cannot be a top-down approach. It has to be the states and at the district level. Domestic Indian politics, yes, and I think electoral politics will take precedence over any foreign policy, this thing, but I think the two have to go hand in hand. It's not to say that it's going to be one at the cost of the other. This government is very well aware of the challenges, and so we are trying very hard the policy, but implementation becomes difficult. Also, I think there are two technical issues which I wanted to flag in my thing. Whenever we devise any strategy, and I think there are enough experts, we really need to reconcile in Indo-US technological cooperation. We have to reconcile the US Export Administration regulations, the EAR and the ITAR, that is the International Traffic in Arms, because the US IPR issues would always come in the way of any joint production or co-production. I mean, we've gone into, co-production, but the sharing of technology, the co-development of technology is not happening in whatever these mechanisms. So I think when we, the experts or the track 1.5 and the track 1 dialogues take place, that is an important aspect which needs to be taken into consideration. So that was from my presentation, and I think have I answered the two questions? The second one, there was this. Thank you.
So the question posed to me was whether the efforts done by the state government were superficial or whether we had actually benefited the MSMEs. In 2016, when I took over as the Director of Aerospace and Defense, I had also the same feeling that there's a large industrial base here and they have some needs. So let's kind of go and do some work with them. So typically we kind of call all the MSMEs here for various conferences. The feedback then was that the predominant supply which they make to was the DRDO and the DPSUs. So most of the MSMEs, because of the small nature, as well as, they have very limited R&D team, and whatever work they do, they work on developmental projects. Once it comes to commercial stage, then the L1 applies and the large firms, latch on this opportunity. And many times they become targets for acquisition and the opportunity is actually lost for them. So then the thought process was, who else can give them orders? Most of them are not, accessible to the foreign market. So we thought we'll kind of bring in all the foreign OEMs here. And that's what essentially worked for the ecosystem per se, because historically we had a large number of defense companies here, but nobody really paid much attention to that because the policies of defense, the policies of space, the policies of aviation is a central subject. So the state government also don't have a very focused policy to address the needs of the industry, because anyway it was taken care by a different department and they follow through certain criteria. So the moment the larger OEMs started coming in, that is when the world took notice of, there's a hub called Hyderabad. There's a place called, a large number of industries coming in here. In fact, Ms. Larson in the morning had said, in fact, she herself, when she visited the factories of Lockheed Martin or Boeing, it's a mesmerizing experience. My boss, Jayesh Ranjan, used to say, in fact, sir used to say that when GE Aviation, GE and Tata has got a partnership for building aero engines, aero engine parts. When they first came here, they clearly said, see, initially, when we look at India, we'll never give the engine technology or anything to do with engine to a country like India. They would think of Korea or Taiwan because that's the perception of the country. And in fact, when Tata's took over, Tata's being a large group, they managed to get it. They took over, some 20% was the market share of some of the critical parts which they're doing. So last month when I visited Tata, the same parts, or rather large number of them were automated. In fact, they did
a lot of process engineering. And today they are single source supplies to a lot of the critical parts, and 80% market share is what they say for those products which used to be manufactured there. And anybody who comes and visit these facilities will have a totally different picture. And that's again, my request to all of you is to see or create more opportunities for the interested stakeholders to come and visit these facilities so that the perception changes. And then there is much more openness for partnering. And every program, again, to answer your question, every program when we approve, I sit in the land allocation committee for every aerospace proposal. And we have seen that progressively in the last 5 years, the same companies, the small MSMEs are increasingly asking for further, because the kind of growth which they're experiencing is fairly high. We probably may have got 500 MSMEs. Today, we got 1,000 plus in that space is again growing. I also mentioned about smaller companies like Azad and smaller companies like Raghuvanshi growing multifold, having partnerships across various domains, because aerospace and defense is again one more, it takes a long while to build that trust. And once an OEM approves, because it follows a series of procedures, once an OEM approves, the rest of the OEMs will flock in, because then it's a tried and tested guy. So that's what our effort has been in bringing in sponsoring a lot of supply chain meets for the OEMs in the state. We have done for Boeing, we have done for Airbus, and that has reaped tremendous rewards in terms of getting orders, getting them familiarized with their MSMEs. And today, many of them are part of the global supply chain. Today, Eaton, Mitsubishi, Safran, in fact, just 40 years, and that's a good example, which I normally say, 40 years they've been in Bangalore. But they when first came to Hyderabad in 2018 with a 60 crore investment. The going was so good that in 2 years' time, they announced a 450 crore investments into creating an aerospace engine parts manufacturing facility. 2 years later, they announced the largest MRO, engine MRO globally for Safran Group, and the first in India, in Hyderabad, with 1,500 crore. And without our asking, they also shifted their 800-seater IT division to Hyderabad. So that's how the efforts which we do kind of have a cascading effect. It is not like, one effort, one OEM we discuss or one discussion. In fact, for the Safran discussion, we also used to say that 400 interactions, lot of multiple meetings. It takes that kind of confidence building to get a credible foreign player to kind of come and have partnerships in India. And that's the story. This is a playbook for not just for Hyderabad, for every defense ecosystem which the country is trying to promote today. Thank you.
Yeah, Dr. Reddy's question, cultural fit, how do you go about that? It's a very big question, actually. And it's domain. It would be very different in different domains. Put it in perspective. Just look at it. I was just talking before we started the session with Sanjay Kolapaka. So his thought was over the last 2 decades, the narrative between the US and India has changed so much. So a cultural fit will change the narrative. There's been a breathtaking change in the relationship between the US and India. Is that well? Perhaps in a way, a lot has been done. We've faltered in a number of places. There's so much scope. But what I want to stress upon is the urgency in this case. So we no longer have the luxury of time to take this relationship forward. So the cultural fit has to come in very fast. And therefore, a lot needs to be done to do that and get that urgency into this relationship. And there are many reasons why. There are many strategic reasons why. But how do we get that? Now, you see, first we have to get over certain challenges like mixed signals coming from each other. And we started doing that. The US has got into a really elevated partnership with us with ISET, and we are going in a beautiful direction. But then we also have, a comment coming from an HR, very respected HR, a human rights organization in the US, which starts commenting in our neighborhood on our democratic principles, whether we are following them or not. Then it talks about human rights in Bangladesh. That doesn't bring about stability in the region. Partners don't talk like this. Mixed signals. Has that been kind of addressed better than it was addressed earlier? Yes, it has. So there has been obviously some talk between the two countries, and that has kind of piped down. So this is the kind of fit that we are talking of at a narrative level, at a strategic level. Similarly, the US could say that the Indians are still dependent upon the Russians. Well, we are. And look at the narrative that came from Europe specifically from UK journalists, as to why Jaishankar is talking to Putin, right? But these are realities which the US has accepted. And US is going ahead with ISET with us, despite our dependence on Russian oil and our dependence on Russian military equipment. It goes to say also that from 68% dependence, we've come down to 57% dependence. Now, whether that has happened by replacing American equipment or some other equipment, or whether it's created some hollowness in the system, I won't be able to say for sure, but I would dare say it's a mix of everything. We are prepared to accept that. So there has been a moving forward on this from both sides. And I think this is what brings the cultural fit together in a larger way, needs to be done faster. But at the domain level, specific domain level, as I said, I think we need to sit together more often. Our thought sets, the way we think, need to come together at the functional level. Both sides are well known for the bureaucracy. I've been part of it. So have American officials. Some American official will hate me because I was instrumental in stopping payments for FMS because we were already overpaying and nobody kind of thought about stopping the payments till indents began to fructify. We were bureaucratic. We continued to pay. They continued to take it. It was not even interest back till the defense minister turned around and said, we're going to stop paying. And it was all over, splashed all over the news. And what I initiated at that time fructified within 1 month, and Mr. Parikar just put a stop to it. It did raise some hackles, but it resolved a lot of issues. So what I'm saying is when you sit more often, and there's no limit to the number of times you should be sitting together. And I mentioned this, should it be a 6 months, like ISET is reviewed every 6 months. It started in January 23. There was a review in September. We are looking at early March. But that may be an overall review. Should there be more reviews between joint working groups? I think they should be sitting together almost every second day. And that's where the cultural fit comes in, as I mentioned earlier, where you thrash out what you're thinking and the other person responds and the leadership continues to push for progress within given timeframes. My issue out here is if we don't make it urgent, it will slip by. The DTTI slipped us by. It didn't get us anything. In a way, it was a failure. Is the ISET heading that way? Hopefully not. And I don't think so. But if we do not be cognizant of the pitfalls, we are heading for trouble. So the cultural fit will happen when we sit more often and at various levels in various forums.
Thank you. Ramesh, finally nice to meet you physically. It's been online interaction for quite a long time. Okay. I got 2 questions, so I'll answer them. Penetrate deep into the Quad. We are the seed of the Quad, the 4 nations. We need to reach out. Look at it the other way. So we're already there. We may have established a base. We need to strengthen the base and we need to reach out. I think that's the path that we should follow. We've already penetrated deep enough. We've realized that. Along with that is I attach a second question on alliances and strategic partnerships to the lady sitting behind you. I'm going to word this very carefully. There are certain things that alliance partners are expected to do and will do. And there are certain things that they cannot do. Strategic partners can do certain things that the alliance partners cannot do. And there are certain things that they won't do. Now, this needs to be worked at an advantage, and Quad often has been described as a mixture of 3 allies and 1 strategic partner. But you see the amount of work that has come out, the base work which has come out. That just needs to be followed up. So reach out, and where interests and values are concerned, because there is going to be a conflict, and I covered some of it in my initial talk, is that we need to work on our common interests as strengths, respect the values and not see them as weaknesses. If we can achieve that balance, then any minilateral or a quadrilateral for that matter can actually do the work it is expected to do. But it has to be inclusive. I'll rest on that. And one of the points that was left out from my earlier talk was all this transfer of technology, and working together and making things together is good. But with the US, somewhere along this path of working together, and even if everything fructifies as we have discussed today, are we going to reach a point where India's self-reliance mode or Atmanirbhar is going to conflict with the transfer of technology from the US and building of assets in India? Now that needs to be closely examined. Sometime or the other, this will come up for discussion. There will be a conflict. No nation will be willing to transfer technology without any dividends or returns. And I go back to what David Bayer has said, the four aspects, investment scale, identity, and all those other issues. This needs to be, I don't know if we're talking about it. If we're not, we need to talk about it. There needs to be a very clear-cut understanding. The tap should not dry up. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'll just take one question from the lady who was there before, and that's the last question.
Journalist. So my question is on artificial intelligence. Quickly, just 2-3 points that I wanted to ask. Given the shifting dynamics of US and China relations, I would want somebody to define India's role in that sector. And when we are talking about indigenization, can you tell us how India is planning to include AI in defense indigenization policy, and what are the market products, AI-based defense products we are looking at?
Question is addressed to.
I'm open to
All right.
Okay. Right. When we look at artificial intelligence, there's a thought that China is the AI superpower. That's a thought. And it's been culled out in a book. But that said, I think artificial intelligence is the end state. What you need is actually big data. Because when you look at artificial intelligence, it acts on a huge amount of data. And really speaking, when we look at it from a defense perspective, there are 3 aspects we should be very clear about. First is, do you have trusted data? That's the start point. Do you have adequate volume of data that you need? And when we look at big data, it has its own characteristic. Do you have that characteristic? Today, we are, as far as India is concerned, we are still consolidating our big data. We have a digital public infrastructure. A lot of data is coming there. But when we look at it from a defense perspective, a lot of data needs to be generated for the kind of requirement for artificial intelligence. So where are we? We are today at data which gives us what is called business intelligence. We are at a stage where data gives us augmented intelligence. That means a human interface to take decisions. But do we have enough data for artificial intelligence? Not in all space. And that's where a lot of jointmanship, a lot of effort has to come in. So we need to create, if I may say, single sources of truth. And one part of mission semiconductor is to create a lot of truthful data. Let me give you an example to just highlight this point. I mean, if we were to look at an engine of any, and we look at condition monitoring of an engine or condition monitoring of an equipment, one sensor can generate about 10 million pieces of data every minute. Now, that's the kind of data that you will get, which will actually transcend to giving you analytics, predictive analytics for using artificial intelligence. Anything less than that wouldn't be very truthful to give you a good predictive analytics. So when we have mission semiconductor, when we have mission quantum, I think they are the drivers of artificial intelligence. But do you have the compute? Do you have the data handling capacity? And therefore, there's a huge amount of connecting the dots when we talk of AI. AI is the end state to do predictive analytics. But there's a lot which goes behind to make it happen. And therefore, when you look at a mission AI, it is actually a number of information systems tied in to give you what I talked of as C7 ISR. And that's the ultimate as we look at the next decade. Something more may come up because cognition, when we look at cognition, when we look at emotion, today, a human being can take a decision whether to shoot or not to shoot. But when you look at a lethal autonomous weapon space, which is based out of artificial intelligence, it is not going to have that emotion. So the next stage to cognition is emotion. And there's a lot of work happening there as well in brain dynamics. So really speaking, when we look at an Indo-US AI-based relationship, it's a combination of sensors, that is semiconductors, quantum, that is compute, and then analytics, big data analytics, which could be BI, augmented intelligence, leading to artificial intelligence. I hope I've answered in some form.
I'll just add on a couple of thoughts on this. I think General Kapoor has raised some of the major issues, but 2-3 add-ons. Certainly, data is what you require. So, synthetic data, when fed into AI, is likely to give you false results. And therefore, it's very important to have data which is conditioned towards use in AI, and that we lack. So we need support on that. So we go ahead and we are very clear now that the pace of change that AI brings in is going to be very fast. So if we are not early movers, and if we are not part of the rule makers, then we will continue to be the followers. And therefore, it's imperative for us to catch this bandwagon early, and steps have been taken. So you recently had the Global Partnership on AI, which was initiated by the Prime Minister. It happened in Delhi sometime. There's a lot of dialogue happening in AI. What we need to do is to get into the regulatory framework mechanisms as well. So today, even in the UN, we don't have a regulatory framework for cybersecurity. We want to start with that and also with the regulatory framework for AI. Maybe there we will get some benefit. So even smaller countries, and recently we had a very high-powered panel discussion, which I had curated in the USI with a group of AI experts who are advising the UN. It's an international one. So General Shanahan had come over from the US. He's the inaugural director of the Joint AI Commission of the US military. He explained to us how he went through Project Maven. You can check out what this project is about. But it was such a time deadlined project. And he gave us a lot of thoughts on how we should be working on this. So we are taking a lot of, cues from the US. We need to actually start being with them at the functional level. I think as far as the current progress in AI is concerned, we are taking baby steps. So if you want to know what's happening, where it's going to come, AI will come into every aspect, wherever you have communications, wherever you have IoT and 5G supported IoT or 6G supported IoT. So it was going to be all pervasive. There's no place where it won't be. It is going to be in every aspect of our lives, including military systems.
Thank you so much, sir. I think we can all agree that the India-US defense cooperation has come a long way and is set on a firm footing, which will take us into deeper collaborations on defense and emerging technologies. I thank the panelists for their inputs, and with this, we conclude the first session. Thank you so much.
So with this, the panel discussion is going to be on global strategic cooperation in the Indo-Pacific region. With this, I would like to call upon Chair and Moderator, Dr. Pooja Bhatt, Independent Analyst and Maritime Governance Researcher. Our first panelist, Mr. Dinakar Perry, Senior Associate Editor with The Hindu. Mr. Sanjay Pulipaka, Chairperson, Politia Research Foundation, Hyderabad. Dr. Shrishti Pukram, Deputy Director, Academics and Research, India Foundation. And Dr. Swasti Rao, Associate Fellow, Europe and Eurasia Center, Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis. With this, I hand over the reins to our chair and moderator.
Thank you, CUTS International, Puru, and the entire team for having me here in Hyderabad, city I'm visiting for the very first time. Thank you for your hospitality. And thank you everyone for joining us back in the post-lunch session. We promise that we will try to keep you both informed and entertained in the second panel, so ensure that you don't sleep off with the post-lunch siesta. While our fourth panelist is joining us. So the second panel is more about informing, like we are zooming out from the very technical first session that we had about US-India relation and the various threads on that. We're shifting to a larger perspective, understanding how US-India relationship will work out in the global strategic partnership in the Indo-Pacific. So before that, I would want to start with, putting a picture of Indo-Pacific for the people who are interested to know about it and why Indo-Pacific is so important. So the importance of Indo-Pacific cannot be overstated anymore. You've been hearing it for now quite some time. All of us have been reading in newspapers, following in the TV news articles and everything. So what has happened in 21st century is Indo-Pacific has replaced the importance of Atlantic, which was there in the 19th, 20th century, and the trade and the economic political relations that used to happen. Now the entire focus has shifted to the region of Indo-Pacific for the very important reason that plays into our favor, which is our demography. 2/3 of the humanity stays in Indo-Pacific. When we talk about Indo-Pacific, we talk about roughly 40 countries who are, either you talk about the maritime, territorial, or the island countries. We are in total of 40 countries in the Indo-Pacific, depending upon which country's strategy you look at it. But I'm overall stating it. So the demography, the people has become the power of Indo-Pacific. First of all, the demography not only provides us market, because when you have people, they are producers of your raw material, they are also consumers of your raw material, finished products. So that drives your economy. Also, demography plays in our favor because the largest of the humanity lives here. So wherever humanity is there, your foreign policy interest would lie there. So in that context, Indo-Pacific in the last few years has emerged as a very important geopolitical stratagem. What is also important to understand that Indo-Pacific is not a homogeneous entity. We were talking about countries ranging from developing, underdeveloped to developing, underdeveloped, and developing. We have various cultures, language, different political and economic systems. So that makes us very varied as a system, and it cannot be seen as from one lens. Indo-Pacific has various entities within itself. So that also works in our favor. We have also a lot of trade going through Indo-Pacific. The entire focus of Indo-Pacific is in maritime domain because the trade flows cheapest in the maritime domain. And understanding the strength of the maritime domain for trade has brought this focus on security of sea line of communication, your maritime trade, and which is the talk of the day right now. But that also comes with certain challenges in the Indo-Pacific. We have understood that the economic developmental concerns are primary for the countries in the region. The countries in the region are seeking their developmental, enhancement. They're seeking for, their economic development, their people welfare. So that is a larger focus of the country, countries here. They also have historical issues, so which makes it really difficult for them to cooperate amongst each other. There are different threat perceptions for the country. Like if you see from the US perspective or from the EU perspective, the threat in the region would be different. But if you look within the region, countries see these threats from different viewpoints. For some, their immediate coastal security is their problem. Some for them, even for island countries, I will be listening to one of the scholars later, their own existential problem because of climate change, sea rise is their existential issue. So they're the focus of threats are different. Also, what has emerged very clearly in past so many years that these countries try to avoid the great power rivalry, which is between US, China, US, Russia. So countries have tried to maneuver their way in terms of between these great power rivalries, so that they're trying to cooperate with both Russia, China, US, as well as they're trying to find new, more cooperative mechanisms. Another angle that we have to understand about it is the Chinese approach in the Indian Ocean region, which is also a very real threat, because of which Indian Ocean has become very important. China, if you know that they have this vision of becoming a global maritime power, so with following that vision, they are developing their navies, they are developing their port development across the Indian Ocean region, and we are seeing these ports with dual use infrastructure, which can be used both for military and civil purposes. So those are beginning to be new threats. Now we see Chinese ships every now and then, research vessels every now and then in the Indian Ocean. So this is another angle of threat that's adding to the Indo-Pacific stability and prosperity. Last but not the least, I would bring in the non-traditional threats issues like climate change, which has multiplied the focus of non-traditional threats. We have the issues of piracy, we have the issues of maritime crime. So there are a lot of issues which have multiplied the already fragile ecosystem of Indo-Pacific region. Within this framework, if you want to talk about that, are these countries which are already struggling with poor economies and fragile systems, are they capable of taking care of their threats on their own? And the answer is very clear, no. And in this regard, we are seeking more and more cooperation. Cooperation is not easy, but cooperation is the only answer. We have to also understand that the mechanisms of these cooperation cannot be only within the country. We have to seek extra regional countries within the region who have the wherewithal, who have the knowledge, who have the capacities, and they could come in and help the Indo-Pacific region in developing their own ecosystem towards the Indo-Pacific region. So with this broad framework, I would want to start today's panel. We have four very esteemed scholars who will be filling this entire picture that I've drawn for you, that how India sees its own maritime and national maritime security architecture, how island countries look at it, how EU look at it, and how US looks at it. I think that will give us a overall holistic picture of what is the current status of Indo-Pacific and how countries from outside can come and help us in building a more secure and prosperous Indo-Pacific region. With this, I have some housekeeping rules. So we'll have two sessions of conversations. It will be having a more conversational style of conducting this panel. So each panelist would be given approximately 7 minutes for the first round of their questions, and then second round we'll do for 6 months, and then followed by Q&A. With that, we will have our first speaker, and which is Dr. Sanjay Polipaka. And he'll be generally letting us know about what is the entire maritime and national security architecture within India is. So over to you. And you have 7 minutes.
Good afternoon. Good to be here. Thanks to Kut's leadership, specifically also to Puru and Mr. Ganguly and others who have worked tirelessly to make this event successful. There are some advantages and challenges speaking immediately after lunch. Depends on how you see it. Half of the audience is anyway half asleep. And the function of the speaker is to put the rest of the audience to sleep as well. I'll do my best in achieving that objective. Let us see what is global strategic cooperation in Indo-Pacific. And if you look at one of the trends that is taking place in Indo-Pacific, it is now well established that the locus of economic power has shifted from west to east. In addition to China, quite often when people talk about power shift, they talk about China. But what needs to be remembered is that in addition to China, the larger East Asian region has progressed economically, and India is also growing. And there is also an India-United States partnership that is taking place. It is precisely for these reasons that you have a construct like Indo-Pacific coming into play in contemporary times. Regions or political constructs, they are power constructs. It is this power shift that has facilitated the rise of the Indo-Pacific. That is something that we need to keep in mind. The second is the dichotomies that are there in Indo-Pacific. There is growing economic integration, but there is territorial conflict that is taking place. So that is one of the important dichotomies. And even when economic integration is taking place, there is a lot of anxiety about the scale, the nature, and the quality of the economic integration. So that is the principal dichotomy that is taking place in the Indo-Pacific. There is growing hunger for regionalism in the Indo-Pacific region, but at the same time, there are disappointments with the way regional frameworks are functioning. There are growing strategic partnerships, but at the same time, we are also discussing about alliances, the challenges that come with it, abandonment, entrapment, and all those issues are being discussed. Indo-Pacific is a large region. The sub-regions need to have their own separate security architecture, and at the same time, they need to be interrelated. And Indo-Pacific, within Indian Ocean, there are diverse challenges as well. If you look at this Indo-Pacific, we have the fairly large coastline, 70% by trade in terms of value, 90% in terms of volume. India conducts the trade. And one of the principal challenges that India has is the emergence of China in the Indian Ocean in the recent past. All those places that you see there, they are where Chinese are investing in some form or the other, or they're proposing to invest. So Indian Ocean is now becoming significantly, we are seeing significant presence of Chinese investments in the Indian Ocean region. So that is something that we need to take note of. That is a big security challenge for India, given what is happening on our northern borders. If you look at Cox's Bazar, for instance, yes, there was Chittagong port which was not operationalized, which the Bangladesh government cancelled. But Cox's Bazar, a small submarine base, was constructed by Chinese for Bangladesh. Bangladesh says it is not going to allow Chinese to use it, but the point is that construction of the base by Chinese needs to be recognized. And of course, we know all about Djibouti and what is happening there and the emergence of Chinese support base there. In addition to that, there are a lot of news items that are coming. For instance, Karachi. Few months ago, when I was keeping track of it, there was a news item that because of the economic crisis, the international terminal within the Karachi port, they were planning to sell it off to Chinese. If that happens, it has a serious consequence for India as well. Of course, we know about Gwadar and what is happening there, the Chinese massive investments that are happening. So if you look at it, these ports are not coming up in isolation. They are coming up with resource port linkages, which means there are pipelines and other networks that are carrying resources. If you look at Eastern Africa, a lot of resources are flowing from inside Africa to the East African coast and then going to China. If you look at Chokphu in Myanmar there, you will notice that fairly large number of oil and natural gas resources are being piped through Chokphu in Myanmar. So all those things are happening. So these ports are not happening in isolation. They're establishing linkages, forward linkages, backward linkages to access natural resources. Sometimes these ports and other things are also being used to capture elite. For instance, Carnegie report pointed out that how investments in port infrastructure facilitated greater penetration into various ruling elite that is taking place. And of course, it is increasing influence. Probably Shrishti will speak about Maldives and those things, but we are seeing the Chinese influence in these island states and Indian Ocean states. That is something that is happening that needs to be noted. Much of this infrastructure is dual use also, because ports are ports. They can be used any which way you want to use them. And quite often we talk about Malacca as a choke point for Chinese and others. But if you look at it, the way the Gwadar is operating, the way Djibouti is coming into play, choke points are not just for China. It can happen for anyone tomorrow. So choke points, when we talk about, we should talk about for whom and how it is going to play out. That is something that we need to take note of. The other important thing is there is growing presence of Chinese nuclear submarines have been sighted since 2013. And there is increasing Chinese submarines visiting Indian Ocean region. Surprisingly, China has been deploying IOR submarines for anti-piracy. I don't know how it works, but that is something that is happening. There have been surveillance vessels, underwater drones have been used in the Indian Ocean region. And there is, of course, the joint military exercises, naval exercises that are happening, such as Sea Guardian and other things. So China has been selling submarines to Myanmar and Bangladesh as well. So Bay of Bengal, Indian Navy has now not only to keep track of other submarines, but also these submarines and account for them on a daily basis. So that is another important challenge that we have. And of course, China is asserting its influence and has started renaming some of the seabed features in the Indian Ocean region. That also needs to be taken note of. It is an indication that it is sort of claiming some kind of historical engagement with these regions. So that's the other one. There is a lot of non-traditional security things that are happening in the Indian Ocean region. One is illegal, unreported fishing that is happening. Really, a lot of fishing that is happening there is going, and we are seeing state-supported distant water fishing fleet.
So you have 1 minute.
So that is happening. Piracy, we thought it was over, but now that is no longer the case. We are seeing a lot of challenges in the Western Indian Ocean that needs to be noted. Broadly, there are 4 pillars of maritime security. One is domestic. You see a lot of upgrades that are happening in terms of surveillance networks and other things. Regional, we have a Sagar philosophy that is guiding the engagement. And then security, we are doing a lot of security upgradation, modernization, and all other related works that are happening. We are collaborating with various countries in the region, from Mauritius, Seychelles, and all those island states as well. And in the larger Indo-Pacific, we are having trilateral, bilateral relationships. We are collaborating with France, and of course, Quad is an important platform. So I'll stop here. That's exactly 6 minutes, 50 seconds. And I'll talk about what are the areas of collaboration, given these security challenges between India and United States in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for keeping up to the time. Now I have Dinkar Perry, who is himself a journalist, defense journalist from Delhi. And from him, I would want to understand what are how, from his own experience, how has there been an evolution in the US-India defense cooperation? What have been, if you have some stories which can help us, understand those issues better. So you have 7 minutes again.
So quickly take off. The transformation in India-US defense cooperation, covering it as a journalist for the last decade now, has been transformative, yes, in many ways. So yeah, there are a bit of disagreement, but increasingly there is more and more convergence. So I'll just kind of track a few important milestones, and then I'll try and give a few anecdotes, kind of just to kind of say, to just kind of say with an example of how actually things have transformed. Because the devil is always in the detail. And what matters is how much things have changed on the ground. I mean, we can talk policy all the time, but how much has actually things changed on the ground, say between the militaries, the bureaucracies, that's actually phenomenal. I mean, how much things have changed. So probably for me, I mean, in the recent past, the first milestone would be the 2016 logistics agreement, which actually we were negotiating for about a decade. Finally, it happened in 2016. Then Minister Manohar Parrikar and the US Secretary of Defense, Ash Carter. Ash Carter really pushed the India relationship a lot. So 2016, in fact, one funny anecdote, not for the relationship, but just a funny thing. When the agreement was being signed in Delhi, in South Block, in the main hall of South Block, so both the ministers were there. Ash Carter was making a speech, and suddenly on the dome of South Block, there is a dome, glass dome. There was back-to-back noise. Actually, Ash Carter literally was interrupted thrice, and then we realized there were monkeys making noise on the top. And that's on the funny side. But so 2016 Limo, the logistics agreement is the first probably, and if you see the transformation, see, it took a decade to do that, and for all the agreements to be done later, it took about 5 years. Since then, Limova, Sismova, Becca, then the industry annexure, and so on. So that's how things have changed. Within 5 years, we have done all the agreements. Now we are, in fact, talking for 3 more agreements. There's an air-to-air information sharing agreement in the works, security of supply agreement arrangement, and reciprocal defense procurement agreement. So they are again important agreements. Probably it'll take a year or 2, I guess, with the change of governments in both countries. So Limova, how it has changed. Limova has fundamentally transformed the way militaries were operating. I mean, there were a lot of apprehensions on Limova, logistics agreement for a long time. Probably a couple of them rightfully so, but broadly there was a lot of apprehensions, misinformation as well. So I'll just bring in that aspect of misinformation, how we journalists deal with. There were apprehensions that, it will be intrusive, you're giving all away all your bases. No, it's just a bookkeeping agreement, simple. You're just doing an annual compilation of all you do, the fuel you share, the exercise you do, just that. So how has it come handy? 2020, fast forward 5 years, start off with China. In high altitude, literally the May 2020, divisions and divisions of the Indian Army were mobilized to Eastern Ladakh. 3 times the usual number. We have about 60,000 roughly there. So we were short of high altitude clothing. So it was so India invoked the Limova with them. US supplied high altitude weather clothing to our soldiers. Literally plane loads dropped in. within days. I think the agreement was done in a couple of weeks, surprisingly fast. And again, the funny part is many of them were oversized because the US generally they are big stature. So for us, soldiers they were much bigger. But on a more important part, that actually happened. I mean, literally overnight, probably after 62, when US sent us AMX tanks, which were again deployed in eastern sector, probably that level of this thing has not happened. Again, one more thing. Cooperation, those minor detail, intelligence cooperation. Again, 2020. I mean, we have been doing that. It is scaled up quite a bit now. But the example is 2020. We really wanted some of their Chinese strategic movements in the Tibet region. And we kept it vague. We did not get too specific, but we asked for broad geographical data and satellite imagery, and they gave it to us under BECA. It was just shortly after signing BECA, in fact. So these agreements have actually fundamentally transformed the way we operated. These two instances are examples. Standoff, both the cases. And going one more example of again the CISMO, communications agreement. We talked about Malabar in the morning. So Malabar exercise in the past, because there's something called a Centric system, which it's a US classified communication network. The US actually used to bring those portable kits, put it on our ships to enable communication. And every time it used to happen in every Malabar. Captain Parma can probably narrate a few instances on that. So once CISMA was signed, now Centric systems are actually installed in many of our headquarters. In Indian Naval Headquarters has 2 systems. And they were also put up in few other headquarters, few other regional naval commands as well. So that's how, in a way, from the apprehensions to saying, oh, they'll listen to everything, air gap, you should have to air gap your networks. They're being into, so they know they'll hear what are, our classified networks chatters. To now, actually, what we are doing, we have Centric systems installed in our naval headquarters right here all the time, around the clock. So that's how, things have, in a way, moved. So next milestones probably would be,
1 minute for you then.
Yeah. Just to finish, liaison officers is one. The amount, again, there was a lot of apprehensions. I know the amount of back and forth bureaucracy that went back. MOD would raise a file and say, why do you need a liaison officer? Oh, you Navy guys want to have fun. Literally. I know who said, I have no names, but yes. So then from there again, now quite a few of them are approved. So one marker probably I'll leave to finish it with is the jet engine cooperation. How much of it, how much real technology you'll get is a matter of debate. I don't want to get into that. The point is, India and US have been trying to have one marker for their relationship, an anchor, something to symbolically. They tried with the F-16, didn't work out. F-18 for the carrier, didn't work out. Probably the G414, the engine, that's probably now will be the anchor where you say, okay, this is how the relationship has transformed. And for India, why is it important? We have for a long time avoided buying offensive military firepower from the US. Probably the M777 guns were the first ones, then the Apaches. Mostly they were all support platforms. C-17, C-130s, all of them. So now our frontline fighters, which is going to roughly about 300 odd LCA, original LCAs and the LCA Mark II, Mark 1 Alpha, Mark II, all of them will be powered by the GE engines. So about 350 of your frontline aircraft will be powered by the heart of the aircraft is the American engine.
Tinker, time's up. Thank you. Okay, sorry for interrupting, but I just wanted to keep it on the time. Now, one of the problems in not problem, but area where we need to look into in the Indo-Pacific is understanding how we can bring about cooperation and inclusivity within the region, which is also India's own agenda in the Indo-Pacific is. For that reason, we need to understand various voices, especially voices from our neighboring countries, from the island countries, and what do they think about entire Indo-Pacific issue and what are their perspectives about it. For that, we'll have Dr. Shrishti Prakrem, who will be sharing her perspective on the issue. Shrishti, all yours. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. And it has been fantastic preparations by CUTS International and the US Consulate. Thank you for all the arrangements. Coming to the topic of discussion for today that we are focusing on is on the global strategic cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. And as rightly the chair has introduced, to the presentation before this is about where are the areas of cooperation when we look at it, not just in terms of seeing what are the areas of contestation, but there are also possible areas of convergence where there can be other actors involved in further strengthening the global strategic cooperation in the Indo-Pacific, not just bilaterally, but also in multilateral platforms. So to speak about it, I just want to share a few points on it, mainly on 3 lines, not just on the role of the small island states. To begin with, the role of the small island states, that's how I'm going to structure my presentation. The second on the ASEAN centrality in the Indo-Pacific. And the third one on how US and India can cooperate in Southeast Asia region. So to begin with, how the small island states are very critical and very important players, especially in the Indian Ocean region. And specifically, I won't be, analyzing each of the country, but on a larger scale, how this small island, all the countries, the small island states can work together. First point, the strategic location. How does it work in their favor? Many of the small Indian Ocean island states, as we know, they are very strategically located along key maritime routes and providing vital sea lands for trade and commerce. So these routes are in fact very crucial for global shipping, and they have economic implications for major powers. Second, maritime security. The Indian Ocean is a very critical region, like all of us are aware here, for maritime security, and the small island nations, they play a role in maintaining stability and addressing security challenges such as piracy, illegal fishing, as mentioned by Sanjay sir earlier, and other transnational threats. Third point, resource riches. The small island states, they possess valuable maritime resources, including fisheries and potential hydrocarbon deposits. So as global demand, we see that for resources rises, these nations, they become very important players in the economic dynamics of the region. Fourth, climate change and environmental impact. Small island nations, as they are most vulnerable on the impacts of climate change, including the rising sea levels and extreme weather events, we see that these challenges, in fact, have broader implications, not just to the small island states, but also for regional stability. And it could lead to increased international cooperation on climate-related issues. Then the fifth point that I would like to focus on is on economic partnerships. When I'm talking about economic partnerships, some of these nations, they are increasingly becoming hubs for economic activities, including trade and tourism. That's why earlier I said I'm not going to focus just on one particular country, be it Maldives, be it Madagascar, be it Sri Lanka, Seychelles, but it's a larger perspective of all the concerns of these small island states. So their economic partnerships, in fact, and their relationships, it can influence economic dynamics and development. Sixth is regional organizations and alliances. So small island nations in the Indian Ocean, they often participate in regional organizations and alliances, contributing to regional governance structures and discussions. And in fact, their involvement can shape collective responses to shared challenges. Then the seventh, which is a very interesting factor, I feel, which I need to dwell, I think, much more on it in later research of mine, is diplomatic influence. Despite their small size, I would say that these nations can definitely exert diplomatic influence on regional and global platforms. They may align with major powers or advocate for their own interests, but it contributes to the overall diplomatic complexity of the region. These are the whole dynamics of the Indian Ocean region. To that, it brings down my presentation on how the second part of it, which I said, moving on from the small island states, when we are talking about Indo-Pacific, how can we not talk about ASEAN centrality in the Indo-Pacific? And to talk about it, I would mainly dwell on what exactly we are talking about when we are talking about ASEAN centrality in the Indo-Pacific. Is there something like that which the AOIP, the ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific, strongly advocates on, but not just the ASEAN platform, but also from the Indian perspective? The first is ASEAN's regional leadership. So ASEAN has historically played a central role in regional affairs, promoting dialogue, cooperation, and conflict resolution among its member states. But a small note when I say conflict resolution, not per se when one of their members are itself in a conflict at currently, where ASEAN doesn't seem to be doing much on it, despite the ASEAN 5-point consensus on Myanmar. So we don't see much progress on that front though. But in spite of that, the organizations, because that brings down again why it's not getting into it, is it emphasizes the principles of non-interference, peaceful coexistence, and consensus building. I think I just have to brush through because I just have a minute. Maybe I can get back to that later. Just the key highlights of it, of ASEAN centrality: promoting a rule-based order, economic integration, engagement with external powers, challenges and diversities, which I'll dwell much detail in the second part of my presentation. Just to end with on how India and US, they can collaborate in Southeast Asia, looking further into the perspective of the Indo-Pacific region, is definitely the Quad partnership. But what do we bring in the Quad partnership? It can aim to enhance, but also engage in dialogues with our other dialogue partners like ASEAN +3, ASEAN +6. We can look much beyond it. Economic cooperation, definitely. And then the security cooperation, where we seem to be doing very well, diplomatic outreach, infrastructure development, but not just that, but also on the softer aspects of diplomacy, where we get to understand the two countries better. So I end my presentation here. Maybe I'll take on a few more points later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rishti, for keeping up to the time and for the excellent presentation. Next, I will just shift the focus to Europe. Europe, because a lot of European countries have their territories for longest of the times in Indian Ocean, and that also brings their interest in the Indian Ocean. They also have a lot of normative interest in the Indian Ocean. So I think we need to understand that how Indian Ocean countries and the entire Indo-Pacific countries can also collaborate and cooperate with the European countries who are interested with their knowledge and resources. For that, we'll have Dr. Swasti Rao, who will be speaking with us, who will be explaining us more about Europe-India maritime security and how we can go about with the cooperation on connectivity. Over to you, Swasti.
Well, thank you so much. I hope I'm audible and I hope I keep your interest alive. Anyway, so first of all, thank you, Puru, for having us here. Thank you, Cuts, for this wonderful opportunity. And thank you to the panelists, all my earlier brilliant panelists, especially from the first session, who have really done the important context setting. So let me begin by saying that whatever I speak of the India-EU maritime security cooperation, etc., is going to be contextualized in that larger framework that I'm not going to reiterate, because we all know that larger framework. The other thing that I decided to do in the first 7 minutes allotted to me is to tell you exactly what I'm going to be talking about. How do I identify the critical drivers of how to enhance EU-India maritime security component? And then perhaps in the second one, so that you have a sense of what I'm going to say today, is to talk about how to rally collaboration around something tangible to add to the security architecture in the Indo-Pacific. So with that, like I said, that I'd be talking about the critical drivers and that I call pathways for optimizing convergence of the two sides. Of course, let's understand that India-EU security, dimension or the domain has basically two dimensions. One is the EU-India defense industry cooperation, which is also very important and upcoming, but this is something that I'm not going to be talking about. It is the second thing that I'm going to be focusing today on, which is the EU-India maritime security in the IP region. And of course, I mentioned the larger context out there was the deepening US-China rivalry, the strategic competition, and the wariness on the part of the middle order powers to actually take sides. So this is where India and EU find their convergence of interest in the larger Indo-Pacific domain. Now, like I said, that let's talk about the first driver that I've been talking about, which is how do we deepen an ongoing cooperation? And the second driver is then how do we add to the tangible security architecture? So these are the two important things I'm going to talk. First, like I said, how do you deepen an ongoing cooperation? Of course, it is exemplified by the coordinated maritime presence concept of the European Union in the region. Now, CMP is a comprehensive framework. There's little time for me to get into it, but there is a lot of work happening on it. There are its strengths, there are limitations, and we are trying to put together a framework which can enable better cooperation. So CMP as a comprehensive framework, it encompasses vital elements such as the MDA, the joint exercises, port calls, and it builds on other existing cooperative frameworks with partners in the broader, Indo-Pacific region. If there's time for question answers, I'll take that up. Now, but what happens usually, typically when we talk about EU-India security dialogue, I think there is a problem of perception, right? The thing is, and I think everybody would agree on this, is that New Delhi does not view Brussels as a reliable security partner, let alone a security provider. And this is something I think which is also dawning upon in a tangible manner when in my discussions and conversations with a lot of Europeans. So they understand that. So the thing is that how can New Delhi reimagine and envision Brussels as a potential security provider? The only European power that fills this imagination is definitely and undoubtedly France. So we would like France to do the talking, but the European Union framework doesn't really allow for it, okay? Because for there, France is one of the EU 27 countries. And this has been one of the themes that has been coming up repeatedly when we talk about EU-India, the CMP dialogue. So one thing then, of course, is how do you actualize this reimagination? And what I've done is that through my paper, what I argue, I mean, this is of course part of the larger work that I also do, is that yes, there are ways in which you can help this perceptual gap. One is that you can deepen, of course, the CMP, which is going on. The other is that you can talk about better defense industry cooperation, which is also happening, though it is still nascent. And third is that you come up with more tangible security architecture. And this is something that I'm going to be talking about in my next thing. Anyway, so coming back, like I said, that CMP is already deepening. Second is that we need a collaborative effort, right? Now the thing is that let me just talk a little bit about the CMP, which is the coordinated maritime presence. It's been the most recent and the most substantial development without a doubt. India has been recognized as a significant partner. We already have, before CMP came, we have India-EU established maritime security dialogues since at least January 2021. These were complemented by security and defense consultations that commenced the next year in June 22. These collaborative efforts have found expressions in operational activities and joint naval exercises, etc. And all of this has gained momentum. Most recently, the appointment of a military attaché, to New Delhi is definitely an upgrade. And additionally, the two sides have at least 4 EU-India workshops that have provided a platform to explore and delineate the contours of this cooperation. But like I said, that this particular thing by itself is not enough to address the perceptual gap. What you do need in a perceptual gap, I mean, it's great that, one of the panelists here talk about co-designing and co-developing norms in the emerging security architecture. And this is where I'm going to be talking about, the second thing, which is that there is a need to rally collaborative efforts towards contributing to substantiating the security architecture in the IP region that does not deepen the great power rivalry, pushes multipolarity, and engages a host of smaller players in the region under a more anodyne leadership than USA can alone provide. And that is where US comes in the picture. Now, the thing is, like I said, that this is also again a part, and I will briefly tell you this before I end and then I come back again, is that what I've been working upon, recently is that how can we have a hybrid threat center in the Indo-Pacific under the leadership of the EU. I will tell you a little bit of the background, and when I come next, I will tell you exactly what has happened in this particular regard. See, the one thing is that there already exists a Center for Excellence on Hybrid Threats in Helsinki in Finland, which was put together in 2016. And 2016, like about 20-30 NATO countries, and Finland and Sweden were not NATO countries then, they came together for this because there was an
You have one
rise. Yeah, I'll just wrap wrap this up in another 30 seconds. And so there was so this is the background. They already have a Center for Excellence. If you were to Google it, you will see that it is a fairly, extensive framework for identifying and then, operationalizing responses to hybrid threats. Of course, we all know hybrid threats are one of the most important, threats in the Indo-Pacific region as well. So the second part of my argument would be, how can we construct not on the similar lines, but because you have already something out there which has been working for a while, you have the strengths and weaknesses ready. Can you replicate, and if with what kind of recalibrations, the same kind of a thing in the Indo-Pacific? And in the second intervention, I would tell you what exactly I think the structure should look like. And I will also tell you what progress has been made on this aspect. Thank you.
Thank you all the panelists for keeping up to the time and giving us a very broad-based picture of how each of these regions and countries look into the issue of Indo-Pacific. And now once we have that broad picture in front of us, I will take the second session where the speakers will also continue the same conversation on which they were speaking on earlier. Dr. Sanjay would continue with telling us about he has already mentioned about the national security architecture, maritime architecture. So now I would want to understand, and for the larger knowledge, that how does this comprehensive strategic partnership work in the Indo-Pacific scenario, and what are the potential areas of collaboration, and something that was you also were talking about earlier?
Thank you. Yeah. What are the next steps and possible areas of cooperation that we are looking at? I think one of the things that I mentioned in my presentation is that there is considerable naval presence and other presence of China that is growing in Indian Ocean region. So probably one of the things that we can think of is greater collaboration in undersea surveillance system, and how do we fill this gap, and how do we facilitate more interactions along coastal surveillance radar systems in the IOR and also in the Pacific. When a platform, when a ship or something that leaves in the Pacific Ocean starts moving, whether it is undersea, above the sea, whatever, we should be able to keep track of it from its origin point. Probably that is one of the areas that we and United States can collaborate along with Quad countries. We have people like Mr. Parmar here who know much more about this, so I'll not dwell onto it. The other dimension is in terms of regional frameworks. There is Indian Ocean region, which has its own areas of this thing. Focus, but how do we scale it up? United States is a dialogue partner. How do we make IOR a more effective organization? Because if you leave this space open, we have seen what China has done recently by organizing an Indian Ocean meet recently. So that is something that we need to keep track of. The other is the whole east coast of Africa story that is happening. We have started something called Asia-Africa Growth Corridor, but it has not taken off with India and Japan. Is there a possibility of renaming it and calling it Africa Indo-Pacific Growth Corridor and bring in United States and others and see what are the critical infrastructure investments that we can do so that can fundamentally alter the landscape there in terms of connectivity networks and also become a showcase in terms of projects that can be done in the east coast of Africa. Related to that is the Quad Infrastructure Coordination Group has been formed. Probably it's high time we take up some projects under that and do something in India's neighborhood. I wrote about collaboration and coordination. What do I mean by that? It is not mandatory that India and United States or Japan or Australia should always collaborate on something. We can coordinate. If we are putting a pipeline into Nepal, what is the overseas development assistance that United States or Australia or Japan can do in coordinating, building things around that? Because that is how we can coordinate our overseas development assistance in a much more focused, in a much more effective manner. Then how do we ensure, I mean, the other way of dealing, the other challenge is illegal drug trafficking and criminal syndicates. Can we replicate the example of Information Fusion Center that has been operationalized in Delhi with the International Liaison Center? And one of my co-speakers here just now spoke about hybrid threat centers. How do we integrate that to address drug trafficking and criminal syndicates? Especially we are seeing it happening both on our western and eastern frontiers. What role can Quad play in that? Can we operationalize some kind of centers that can monitor these things in a much more regular and an effective manner? And lastly, the Indo-Pacific economic framework has been talked about, but we need to think of how do we strengthen it in terms of ensuring resilient supply chains. And we need to work with countries. I mean, Quad Plus has been initiated during the pandemic. Probably we should continue it and develop more synergies. And moving beyond vaccines, and can we take a larger healthcare initiative issue in place in terms of ensuring certain medicines, a certain block of medicines can be manufactured at a very low price, and Quad can take the lead in that. The other is when we talk of strategic partnership, it should, I mean, every partnership these days is being called strategic. Even with Angola, we have a strategic partnership. Understandable, oil resources. So, but point is, when a partnership becomes strategic, only when it alters the balance of power in a region. Otherwise, it's a partnership. So a strategic partnership is that. And I think India and United States and of course the Quad countries have a strategic partnership where they are seeking to alter the balance of power, as I showed in the map. Given the scale of balance, power shifts that are happening, it is important that we consolidate, and every activity should be seen through the prism of altering balance of power in a given region and how it is contributing. Last point, quite often people ask, if we have a war with China, for instance, will United States come? Or if there is a conflict in Taiwan, will India go and fight? I mean, that kind of questions are raised. But what is important to understand about strategic partnerships is that what do you do to capabilities of each other so that you can deter a war before it happens, so that when a person sees your capabilities, he doesn't indulge in any form of misadventure. And that is where we need to think and evaluate about strategic partnerships. And rather than ruminate about possibly somebody coming to your rescue, not rescue, that's a story that will happen later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. You are 1 minute behind, like above, ahead of time. So you finished it early. We have more time for question answer with you then. One thing about AAGC that I would remember asking a Japanese scholar last year about the same question about what happened about AAGC. You know, we don't hear about this from your, nobody, no politician, Japanese or anyone talk about it. And he gave a very surprising answer that within the internal, conversations, I think AAGC is more or less dead for them. I don't know whether it's for political reasons, for the whatever, but that was one of his responses. So, but he was a scholar, so we do not know what actually political leaders think about it. Okay, so next we move on to Dinkar Perry. Dinkar, you have very rightly explained about US, India cooperation. Needless to say, it's very important in defense area. But there is also a lot of disinformation, misinformation also going about how certain things are not right or certain things are not working the way they are. Maybe to just jeopardize the entire relationship. So I just wanted to understand that how you have been covering US-India relations for some time, and how your experiences has been as a journalist covering this relationship, and what have been the realities of it actually.
Thank you again. So I'll just one, of course, I mean, there are certain biases, if I want to call, as journalists when we report, but there also, I mean, as someone covering defense, I get a lot of questions from policymakers as well. So there you actually see a certain extreme extrapolations. For instance, see, when we look at India's military modernization, by default, the question is, oh, India is so much into Russian. Yes. Then when will you move away? It will take time. Then and there's an assumption, okay, if not Russia, then it's US. No. I mean, the reality is somewhere there are assumptions made. The reality is to understand how the military modernization is happening in the first place. For example, we were doing assembling, license production, in the past, we have done Russian for a long time. And if that was the perfect benchmark of technology transfer, we should have been exporting to the world now. But we are not, we're still importing it, many of the stuff. So now, when you're moving now we are at a stage where we are saying, we'll build the platform our own. Whoever can give what, bring it, put it into our system. Take the example of the aircraft itself, light combat aircraft, light combat helicopter. In fact, helicopters and aircraft are probably the best examples as a wholesome platform. We are saying we are building the platform, the engine comes from somewhere else. The radar, currently it's Israeli, but we're allowed to put an Indian one. The weapons, partly Indian, partly French. So that's the changing ecosystem. So now when you say, if not Russian, is it American? Probably not. It doesn't suit us in all conditions. For example, again, the question is, why doesn't India buy the Striker? In fact, we are negotiating the Striker infantry combat vehicles. It's under discussion for co-production, co-development as part of the defense industry roadmap. One of the several under discussion, apart from the engine transfer. So the thing is, why doesn't India buy it? I mean, it's been there for a long time now. The US has been pushing the Strikers for almost a decade now. The question is, it probably does not suit our requirement so much. As simple as that. Because given our geography, terrain, conditions, it just makes better sense for us. We need a more rugged platform, not a capital maintenance intensive platform. As simple as that. Sometimes those nuances are lost. So a lot of time and effort is spent where it probably should not have been. For example, F-16. F-16 was something probably would never have purchased. It was a deal which would never would have happened. But a lot of time and effort was spent on it for whatever reason. And it actually remains a heartburn that I just mentioned in the previous as well. And same thing with F-18. Rafale was an obvious choice for our carriers. But then a lot of time and effort was spent to market the F-18. But again, we already announced just a few months back, mid last year, in July last year, we announced the Rafale as the shortlist for our carrier. So the F-18 again is out. But anyway, now the engine deal is in the hot seat, if I can call that. So there is a bit of a probably I would say a lot of lack of clarity on how the whole modernization is shaping up in the first place. Because once you understand that, then you can fill in where cooperation can go forward. For example, co-development, co-production. We did a lot of effort under DTTI. Then we did, there were 4 Pathfinder projects, 2 joint working groups, 2016, 2017. Mostly nothing has actually taken off. No, none of it. The jet engine then actually was shelved. Now it's happening in a different way, not under DTTI though. Carrier cooperation has not happened. And the 4th Pathfinders then have not moved forward. But now, I mean, probably learning from the lessons, the efforts now that I said, what a bunch of them announced, the engine, drones, and a few others, including long-range artillery. They look promising. So I guess we learned from the lessons. I know how things have not worked, because the DTTI was pushed at the highest levels, but really didn't move. And there's also don't forget the platform called Indus-X. In fact, that's where the industry comes in. Probably that it's a better model, because now you're leaving the industry to put across their competencies and say, okay, now do it. You give them a problem and say, okay, now do it. That's probably a better model, because our industry is different. The American industry is different. I mean, it's all public sector. Sorry, it's all private sector. For this, mostly DPSs. Now you have your bigger companies coming in, but the caveat is there. Our bigger companies are still not spending so much on R&D. It's limited. It's scaling up. It takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. So there's a gap there. So probably the MSMEs, or Praveen talked about the ecosystem here in Hyderabad. That actually is a great way forward. Indus-X actually looks promising, because they have just launched 2 initiatives. One for oil spill detection and undersea communications, Navy and Coast Guard. It does look promising. So I guess in the next month, or I think probably end of this month or early next month, we'll have the shortlisting of the companies on both sides. So that's, again, probably a better model for co-development and co-production.
1 minute for you, Dinkar.
Rather than, identifying ambitious projects which don't really materialize, because carrier cooperation is never happening. US only has nuclear powered carriers. We cannot have nuclear powered carriers. So there's a bit of a, bit of reality check required there, if I can call that. So broadly, just in one line to sum it up, I think if you actually just go back in the last, it's not 1 decade, there have been several misses and also positives. So I guess something we have to correct, a bit of course correction is required to be able to now actually take forward the co-development projects forward, because we keep drawing parallels with Israel and France. So a bit of, we have to find a midway in between. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dinkar. Now we come back to Shrishti. One of the underlying factors in Indo-Pacific is ASEAN centrality. So help us understand what exactly that means, and how, and ASEAN centrality, which India speaks of, other countries also speaks of, helps in the entire Indo-Pacific, collaboration, cooperation. because I'm asking this question for one more reason, because if the Indo-Pacific Outlook doctrine document that had come in 2017, they clearly said that, you know, they don't want to rewrite the Indo-Pacific rules of order. They want them to be, you know, shaping the entire region. So I think there is certain kind of mismatch in the ideas and perception on how they see the entire thing happening. So if you can just help us understand that.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Coming to the point of what are the key, I would say, characteristics of ASEAN centrality in the Indo-Pacific, or key points, like I mentioned briefly during my first presentation, was on ASEAN's regional leadership. Then that well explained, let's come down to promoting a rules-based order. So when we are talking about promoting a rules-based order, ASEAN has always advocated for a rules-based order in the Indo-Pacific, supporting the United Nations Conventions on the Law of the Sea as the basis for resolving maritime disputes. So to cite an example, many of us might be aware of the new map which was released by China in the end of August. There were a lot of contestations, and this was, I think, one of the first where 4 of the ASEAN countries, Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, and Vietnam, took a strong official stance of releasing statements from their respective MOFA. Definitely unofficially, there has been always, but yeah, Vietnam is a different case. But what was most surprising was when Malaysia, Philippines, Indonesia, they released official statements on that. So the South China Sea disputes, it involves multiple ASEAN countries, the member states, like I mentioned, 4 of it. It has been a focal point, and with ASEAN working towards a code of conduct to manage tensions and prevent conflicts, ASEAN centrality very much dwells on that. Yeah, definitely we cannot ignore the fact that there are diverse opinions among the member states, as also in the population in the ASEAN countries, about the usage of the term, in fact, Indo-Pacific. They have certain reservations on that still, which is, we need to still maneuver around that. They still use Asia Pacific, not to a great extent, but some of it, they like to promote that. But what binds them together is more of the economic integration, I would say, where the regional organization ASEAN, they play a key role in the Indo-Pacific region, such as the ASEAN Economic Community, which is the AEC. And this ASEAN Economic Community has, in fact, it has helped in engaging with various other regional economic partnerships with external partners, not just within their ASEAN member states. Interesting part is that brings down with engagement with external powers. When I say external powers, when ASEAN is engaged with major external powers, including the US, China, Japan, and India, there's a very interesting survey which ICS, the Institute of Southeast Asian Studies, Singapore, does an annual survey every year, where they put it into certain parameters of taking a kind of interview this thing of the ASEAN member states on certain concerned topics of that particular year. And it was in fact commendable to see that unlike previous years, last year, India has improved remarkably in many of the pillars, where ASEAN has more confidence in India. And we can see that there's I would say that there is a change of opinion happening, where in fact we are kept just right after EU and Japan, India, where we were nowhere seen among the top 4 at least. So things are definitely working in our favor, I would say that in terms of that. But when we are talking about external powers, we are not just talking about these 4 countries of India, Japan, US, and China, but we are also talking about other forums like the East Asia Summit we have. And then but that doesn't imply that there are no challenges or there are no diversities. There are definitely difference of opinions among the ASEAN member states. There are challenges where ASEAN as a regional group, that's where ASEAN centrality draws in a much more bigger role. And it kind of justifies that the region is diverse. It has varying levels of economic development. The maritime countries, like there's already complete, I would say, that difference or diversity in terms of maritime countries of ASEAN and the landlocked countries of ASEAN, the Mekong Belt and the maritime side. But it definitely has different kind of political systems, as we are all aware, and security concerns among member states. So when we are balancing the interests of the major powers, it can definitely be challenging. That's why there are a lot of discussions about the US-China competition in Southeast Asia when we are talking about it. But there's also certain things where it could be managed, issues like the South China Sea disputes, where it could be managed and it could be well worked together within certain, I would say that
You have
under
1
the
minute.
UNCLOS, and then definitely it would be much more adding weight to what we call Indo-Pacific strategies. To conclude, I would just say that coming about ASEAN centrality, now when we look at US-India collaboration in the Southeast Asia, Sanjay sir rightly mentioned about we should talk also about coordinating. A solid example, I would say that where we could think of coordinating is where Japan already is doing much in Bangladesh when we are connecting the northeast of India through our ports, through the Matabari deep sea port in Tripura, where in fact it shouldn't be just India, Japan, but US can definitely contribute in coordinating such kind of infrastructure development projects in a third country who is not part of the Quad member, like in Bangladesh. So that definitely diversifies our interests. That definitely brings us more together and more areas of cooperation and potential areas of collaboration. So I would like to end with that. Thank you.
Thank you. So lastly, I would want to draw from Dr. Swasti's last presentation on how strategic partnerships are important and they have become important vehicles of cooperation between the countries. So I would want to understand more that how these cooperations and strategic defense partnerships can bring in, what kind of changes, challenges they can bring in Indo-Pacific region.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Pooja. Like I said that I am, of course, interested, and I think everybody is interested in understanding what kind of security architectures can the Indo-Pacific region have, because the only other example of tangible, solid security architecture is the Euro-Atlantic, which is very different in its in several of its characteristics and context from the Indo-Pacific, regardless of the fact that the two security theaters are merging in many ways. Nonetheless, so the first thing is that like I said that in my previous intervention, that I'm interested in this larger project that I've been working on for a while now, and I've presented it at different governments in France and Paris and Brussels, and also I've tried to understand what is the Japanese thinking about it, and I would like to share with you certain key takeaways that I can probably tell you about this thing. So first is, of course, that we need to keep them in mind the fact that this huge maritime domain that consists of two subsets, the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. Here, we do not have a tangible security architecture, except to some extent AUKUS. The rest are all fluid. Captain Parmar also mentioned that there is a COD, but then perhaps the nimble trilaterals are performing better than the CODs, etc. There are bilateral exercises, of course. There is IPI, etc. The thing is that what really comes in the way of having a more solid architecture here is the constant subtext of the red flags. The US-China rivalry. The players out there do not want more militarization of the region. They do not want to take the binary approach. The NATOization of IP is really looked upon with a lot of doubt. And you know that there is a context of NATO trying to open a liaison center in Tokyo, which was vetoed, so to say, by France, at least for the time being, etc. But there's no doubting the fact that if you look at the strategic concept of NATO in 2022, it does talk about Indo-Pacific. It talks about taking on China. It talks about climate change. It talks about, disruptive technology. So what I'm saying is that, but the players out there are wary of of it. So like I said, that the primary set of research questions that I've been dabbling with then is that how do you constitute a security architecture that reinforces multipolarity and does not add to this bipolarity? It's easier said than done. We constantly keep talking about this framework, that framework, but we find it difficult to provide a logical thread that connects it all. And how do you construct a robust paradigm suited to the context of the IP? Now, here, of course, as Sanjay mentioned, he said that there is a need to have these centers together, and there are so many existing frameworks that probably can brought on board to make more sense of it. Because I focus on Europe and because I work so much on what they are doing in their security theaters, of course, there are certain ideas that then come to mind. And of course, that I mentioned was that how do you create a hybrid center of excellence in the Indo-Pacific under the leadership of the EU? You know why I focus on this is because last time I was in Paris and I was talking to a naval commander out there, and I mentioned this hybrid. I mean, this is something which is little popular out there. I mean, if you were to Google a hybrid threat center for the Indo-Pacific, you will perhaps see the Australians talking about it, some Westerners talking about it, maybe some piece in Nikkei Asia, and that will be it. But why I focus on the leadership of the EU is because even a country like France, which believes in strategic autonomy and wants to push multipolarity, would be wary if it is under the US leadership, right? So they say, so those are the kind of dynamics that I probably want to highlight when I say that it is best suited to the pursuit of the middle order powers to engage with. It genuinely provides a third approach, which goes beyond militarization, of course, on the binary of great power, competition, and yet remains rooted in very realistic security concerns. There's no doubting the fact that AI, disruptive technologies, all of these things are basically going to define how we shape our future engagements in the region. So the argument, like I said earlier, was the potential to evolve from best practices, which are already there in hybrid COE in Helsinki. Of course, it has the potential to involve multiple stakeholders, both state and non-state, and that is the model that I created for it. And it is, of course, it must have the potential to evolve. So it must have the resilience required, to tackle the hybrid security threats in the Indo-Pacific. So flexibility, resilience with a multilateral approach. These, if you look, have to be at the fundamental basics of a hybrid threat center of excellence in the Indo-Pacific. So very quickly, I know there's little time. I'm not getting into why hybrid threats are so difficult and such a challenge for security, particularly in the larger piece that I have been working on. I've been focusing on cybersecurity, misinformation, and the disruptive use of AI. But I will not get into this because I'm sure the people here are already aware, and there's no need to tell you why the hybrid threats are so difficult to nail. But let me come to the structure of the center, that I've been talking about. Like I said, it should be multi-stakeholder, which is more egalitarian. As far as leadership is concerned, I have argued that it should be under the EU leadership or an EU-India bilateral leadership for the Indian Ocean, which can build on IPOI. And there is already, there are already talks happening for an EU-Japan bilateral leadership for Pacific Ocean. So initially, if you remember, I mentioned the two subsets also. So what you can do is that instead of having one entire thing, you can have two, one with EU-India and one with EU-Japan. And then, of course, these will be, partners to each other. You can have a whole host of members, like I earlier argued. And more important than mentioning the specific countries and the literal states, I should be mentioning that they, they must have civil society actors, they must have the startups, they have international organizations, because that is how you add value and substance to these things. And of course, in terms of dialogue partners, I argue that hybrid COE, which is already functional in Helsinki, can be a great dialogue partner. NATO should definitely be in the background, if at all. I personally argue that, it is just a matter of time. I refer to the strategic concept 2022. It is after a decade that NATO has come up with a strategic concept. For the first time, it mentions China. So my point is that the hybrids center should not be under the NATO leadership, because then, of course, countries like India, France, all these countries would not be interested. Anyway, so just the last thing that I want to focus on before I just finish it, which is that, and it definitely must, take on support from the existing partnerships in the region. That's where Sanjay's point is extremely relevant. There is a second pillar of AUKUS, which talks about, technological cooperation among disruptive technologies. It's still open to like-minded countries. There is a Japan-US technological roadmap that talks in great length about it. Of course, there's a NATO strategic concept, which is there. There are partnerships in the Blue Pacific. There is a GCAP agreement between Japan, UK, Italy, which has an entire section on disruptive technologies, etc. And there are several other things. So the argument is to try and complement those things rather than create watertight compartments or silos, because that will defeat the purpose. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you. I think we have the best panelists and they've all finished on time, and it also gives us enough time to ask a Q&A. While you may think of your own questions, I will take the prerogative of the moderator, and I have some questions here. So, Dr. Sanjay, you were mentioning about that there is a emerging multilateral competition between countries in the Indian Ocean. We have now China coming up with its own Indian Ocean region framework. So wherein the countries which are in the region would seek either or partnership within the region. So how do you think this will play out? Like, would multilateralism become a dead factor because everyone is showing multilateralism and then nothing will work? Or do you think it was a good thing to have US providing multilateral frameworks, EU providing, and then China providing, or they can collaborate together? What are your views about it? I will also put a question to Shrishti, when she was mentioning about how these, technologies and, health, the range of cooperation that is happening in ASEAN countries and India. I would want to understand that one of the problems that we actually face on ground when it comes to connectivity is, I'm not talking about only the land connectivity or something, but when they talk about healthcare technology, most of the owners of these products are private industries. And that is when you get into tussle between the governments, because private entities would want to have their own benefits out of it. So how do you think this will play out, basically, when the technologies or service providers are largely the private entities, and then they have to go collaborate with the governments to provide these technologies? How do you think that play out? These are first two questions, and meanwhile you can raise your hands and we can take 2-3 questions at one go. I will first let them answer, then we'll take the questions.
Thank you. There will be multiple frameworks, and countries will choose among these multiple frameworks. They may participate in these multiple frameworks simultaneously. When BRI was announced, some of the Quad countries themselves were interested in participating in it. If the big powers think they can simultaneously benefit from various frameworks, small countries in the region obviously will be more tempted to do so. So it will never be either this or that. It will be both. It will be an and. I'll participate in this and I'll participate in that. But the point is, somewhere along the line, by participating in these multilateral frameworks, it should result in some kind of socialization where you carry values and norms of one framework to the other framework in a better way, not the other way around, where we talk about transparency, where we talk about in terms of transparency, accountability in terms of financial funding that goes to various projects. The best practices should be translated to various other frameworks as well. So that is how I look at it, rather than asking these countries and giving them only one choice. And by giving them options, useful options, then maybe we will be able to impact the evolving multilateral structure in the region.
Fair point, Shrishti.
Yeah. Coming to the point of the Indian presence and the challenges, not just about, like, I won't reiterate the fact of connectivity challenges. There's a lot more to be done in terms of connectivity, especially on land connectivity when we are talking about between India and Southeast Asia. But just to pick one aspect of it, which is of healthcare. When we are talking about healthcare and about the Indian presence in technology, some of the countries in ASEAN, they have a lot of healthcare arrangements, but definitely it's the private sectors which are mostly, taking the lead role on that. So how, what I see is that the improvement, what we can in fact anticipate is of the I mean, revisiting the ASEAN-India FTA, which is coming about very strongly. It has been on hold for a very long time, but the Commerce and Industry Ministry is on board for this on, I mean, reviving the ASEAN-India FTA, adding more, arrangements to it. And they are citing 2025 for the this thing to be upgraded of the ASEAN-India FTA. And the main, I think, key point is to press for removal of non-tariff, measures, non-tariff measures, which in fact, it's going to play a very effective role when we are talking about facilities of the role of the private players. But coming to not just healthcare, when we are talking, there's a lot of traditional medicine healthcare, which is gaining a lot of importance in many of the ASEAN member countries, where it's not the private players, but it's more of our government, the Ministry of Ayurveda, Ayush Healthcare, who are doing more work and more presence in these countries. Just to add one more thing, besides the healthcare, is more about digital payments. Digital payments in India is a success story, which is, again, there are a lot of agreements which were signed between India, Singapore, and many other countries which are opening up where UPI payments is accepted. So this is a success story which many of the ASEAN member countries, they look up to India, they want to adopt, and this is more of digital payments, where it will open up more avenues for cooperation in terms of digital connectivity. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so we. Dr. Parmar and then Mr. Ramesh. So we'll take him first.
Yeah. I have no questions, but I have some comments just to add fuel and get your comments back again. So I'm going to go one by one. Sanjay, AAGC, and my understanding is that the weak partner in this was India. That's one. And therefore, it didn't go through for whatever other reasons is there. But I could be wrong, so I'd like your views on that. There is an alternate which is being thought of and developed, and that's the Lobito Corridor. The Lobito Corridor. This Lobito Corridor. Lobito is a port in Angola. So this railroad line is supposed to stretch from the eastern coast of Africa, goes through disturbed area of Congo, ends up in Lobito. Is being pushed by the US and EU. So when you talk about inclusivity, then it is also a good platform on which perhaps to get India and Japan, because we've already done some homework on this. That's one. The other reason of interest is because this could be an alternate path to IMEC. Given the situation we have in the region right now, IMEC may not be a reality for some time, but you need to have alternate routes. So both of these could be developed. So just thought I'd get your views on this one. Shrishti, ASEAN centrality. When you speak to ASEAN nations individually and ask them what do you mean by ASEAN centrality, they are at a loss to define what it means. That's a weak area. But collectively, we all speak of ASEAN centrality. So whether it's a good rallying point for a strong argument is left open to argument and narrative. So because do remember, ASEAN nations always say that don't force us to choose sides. So that's something that needs to be kept in mind. Swasti, CMP. Now, if you look at the Gulf of Guinea CMP, we recently had a naval ship that I think it went some 12,000 nautical miles around wherever it went. And it exercised with Italian and Spanish ships in the Gulf of Guinea CMP. But the press release did not say maritime exercises in the CMP. It said maritime exercises with Italian ships and Spanish ships in the Gulf of Guinea. So the reluctance to accept the CMP as a concept by the Indian establishment is also there, which means that there is a certain division in the manner in which India, EU, maritime security. I mean, I've been part of it since the first track 2 one we had was in February 2019. So it's come a long way, but there are still lots of gaps. And the main reason I think for this is one is the inability of EU to actually, act cohesively when it comes to certain issues. And then of course, France is going to be the flag bearer for quite some time to come. So that's something that I think we need to look at. The other part is, the Indo-Pacific is too vast and diverse an area to have a singular security architecture. Comparing it to NATO, to my mind, is not the right way to do it. As far as Europe and NATO is concerned, there was one threat, USSR and now Russia. Whereas in the Indo-Pacific, you have multiple threats. Each nation is separate. So try to establishing even a maritime architecture may not be the right path, but just to strengthen the organizations which exist now, IONS, IORA, BIMSTEC, all those issues is perhaps the right way to do it, because you will never get a consensus on a maritime security architecture in that way. Dinkar. I do agree. Every nation has the right to choose the best equipment, and that's why we went the Rafale route, because apparently it fulfilled all our criteria. The armed forces in India operate in all diverse environments. Even in summers, we are operating in -40. All right. So there is a model perhaps that can be adapted if we adopt it, if we look at working with the US, and that's the South Korean model. To give you an example, South Korea set up a factory or an industry in a place called Geelong in Australia, which is manufacturing self-propelled guns, infantry fighting vehicles based on the QRs of Australia's armed forces. We can do that in India. And given that we will look at our own domestic market first, and therefore we'll have equipment that can operate in all these environments, we are actually can become a hub for global export, because we'll cater for all sorts of environments around the world. I just thought I'd put this on the table. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hearty congratulations to all the participants. Wonderful. I really benefited out of this. I'll start with a very positive note. Expect turbulence before you reach certain altitude in life. Fasten your seat belts. First thing that we get into the aeroplane. Same way, quad is on the upswing. But my humble submission to each panelist here, do some self-introspection, including the audience, very well informed audience. Unless and until you built a non-traditional security model as a base, if you see from 1945, today we are talking in 2024. Close to another 20 years will be a 100-year-old from 1945 structures. Is it not the time to rebuild, re-strategize, redesign, or redefine the very concept of security?
Is this question for one of the panelists or the entire?
It's for all the panelists, because each one of them made some to what I'm asking now. That's why I know. So this is one thing. Second thing is, I really agree with Sanjay sir. Sir, if you cannot connect the dots, I think it's going nowhere. So we should put all our heart, soul, and mind into connecting the dots with the same intention, with the same contention. The intent, content, and character of your whole design of building a quad should not be only based on the traditional mode of security model, but also non-traditional security model, which is human security model. This is my humble submission, sir. And to Dinakar sir, I really heard you, sir. Wonderful points you made with a lot of fanfare, elite cream of the nexus between the defense and the political leadership, doing so much of thing about defense and all these things. But to what extent are we finishing? How good are we in finishing the game is what really matters. We are a very good starters. But
thank you. We will give time
Thank
for the panelists
Thank
to
you.
answer.
Thank you.
this. So if there are any answers for the pointers that were given by Parmar sir or Mr. Ramesh, any one of them.
Okay.
Take the lead. Ladies first.
I just insisted on that because you lose a track of who's asking what. So just first to what you said so briefly, yeah, I mean, you had reiterated all the points that I was trying to make. One was, like I said, towards the end, which is that instead of having this one thing in both subsets of the Indo-Pacific, it is better to have one, devoted to the Indian Ocean region subset and another to the Pacific Ocean region subset. And talking about the Pacific Ocean region subset, I already told you the progress that has been made between EU-Japan Center for Hybrid Threats. So I mean, it's just to basically have a little more clarity. And because I think we're talking about things which are so nascent and so at the level of contemplation that I mean, everybody is just trying to grapple with how things are. And the purpose of giving you the Helsinki or everybody the Helsinki model was not to replicate it. It cannot be replicated. I started with the idea that, of course, the security theaters are different. I mean, they are different, and they're different for a particular context. So, I mean, it's very obvious. The point was to actually take the good practices, because if you were to go into it, the kind of work that they have done on misinformation, for example, for disruptive technologies, for infrastructure, critical infrastructure protection, I mean, those kind of things are there. They are by definition not made to sort of, focus only on the hard power component of the security theater, which I find something very suitable to the Indo-Pacific thing. The other thing about CMP, oh well, of course, like I said, that one of the repeated points of discussion between our side and the Europeans have always been on this, which is that why don't you let France do the talking? They understand us better, we understand them. And they said that we are talking about, and that's where we don't fathom EU as a security player, let alone a security provider. And I remember having this conversation at so many of the dinner tables, etc. But I think if you look at it from their perspective as to what they say, first is that France out there cannot really take the lead, at least officially, because it's a Brussels-driven approach, number one. Number two, that of course it is again something which is a work in progress. So one of the things that I'm doing, maybe, of course, Captain Anurag Bisin and I are trying to put together a paper on actually how to make sense of the CMP. Is it going to fly? If it can, then how can you work on it? And then also let both sides have a clear understanding of what CMP can never be, right? So it's better to sort of put that boundary in order to understand what subject matter are we dealing with, instead of talking about everything under the sky and saying that it's the most wonderful thing to have happened to EU-India maritime security. So I'm totally with you on that. Yeah. Thank you. So
I'll start off with your question again, because it was still a very interesting question. You talked about the various frameworks that are there, whether we should either or question that you raised. The other two examples that I would like to give here are Bangladesh is now part of BRI. But when the news came out that it may become joint Quad or Quad Plus, there was unhappiness in China, and they articulated it. Similarly, Nepal signed on to BRI. But when the news came that Nepal has ratified MCC, Millennium Challenge Cooperation funding from United States, certain news items came about saying how Chinese were unhappy with it. So therefore, getting back to your point on multiple frameworks, it is always important for India and United States to put the frameworks on table so that the countries know how the partners that they are partnering with, whether they will respect their choices like we do. So that is something that we need to keep in mind. I agree with you on AAGC for various reasons it didn't take off, but also probably because we are focused now on our neighborhood. Given the scale of penetration that is happening, most of our ODA resources are going into the neighborhood. But nonetheless, we have certain advantages in East African coast because of Indian diaspora and existing business networks that are there between diaspora and the Indian economy here. Having said that, it is important for us to start scaling up our engagement with Africa. We are whether we'll be 5 trillion when and how, we can debate those things, but we will be 5 trillion, and after that we will grow more. We need both resources at low cost, and we need markets at easy access. And Africa as an emerging market is also an important in that sense, not just as a resource. If that is the case, what kind of infrastructures do we need? We can't plan it once we reach a few $1 trillion more. We have to start planning now. So that is the idea that was informing my idea of India Quad collaborating on East African coast and somehow or the other building up things in advance so that we can access both resources in a fair way and also access markets in a very fair manner. So that's my views on that.
While we are just right on time, can I ask the organizer if we can have 10 more minutes as per the original time frame, so we can have one more round of questions? Puru, can we have 10 more minutes so that we can have one more round of Q&A, I guess? Thank you. Organizers are liking it, so we can take 15 more minutes, I guess. So we'd have one more round of question, and then before that it's heads up, I'll give 1 minute each to all of the panelists to wrap up with the major thoughts that they would want to convey to the audience once again. So we have two questions, Dr. Stuti Banerjee, and one. Please introduce yourself and keep the questions very straight and to the whichever panelist you would want to ask. Thank you.
I will try to adhere to the time limit. My only question is that is Indo-Pacific region exhibiting yet another tendency of being a geopolitical turf of big power and small power dynamics, precisely because
The question is directed to you. May want to direct a question to the panelist.
addressing my concerns partially, so I want a bit clarity on it. Precisely because the issues related to small states are not addressed diligently, given the fact that vulnerability of island ecosystems, climate catastrophe, economic and food security, and non-traditional security threats are not being addressed at all. So the whole orientation of Indian Pacific issue is kind of subsumed into this grand narrative of defense and economic partnership. And do you think that it is a very elitist way to politically approach this new christened Indo-Pacific region? And will it deter the kind of intentional substantive partnership that big powers are kind of looking forward to, especially in Indo-Pacific region? Thank you.
Doctor.
Thank you, Pooja. My first question is to Dr. Swasti. How does the EU define hybrid security and how do we define it? Is there a commonality in which we are working on? Because my understanding from our European partners is France takes the lead because it's most proactive in the Indo-Pacific region. And largely for the EU right now, the Indo-Pacific is, in terms of security or how they're looking at it, is mostly confined to the Western Indian Ocean. And in that also, it's still not yet kind of hit India's coastline. So what is the convergence on it? The other question is to Dr. Pulipaka. I wanted to know, you spoke about how strategic partnerships are changing the balance in the region. Now, I wanted to know from you, Russia is increasingly coming into the Indo-Pacific region, even though it doesn't kind of accept it. You have a pushback from the West. It is looking at the Indo-Pacific, and it's increasingly engaging with the ASEAN partners here. So you have the Russia, China, and North Korea axis because they all are very close to each other. So how does that kind of, hit upon the balance of power that's going to be shaping this region? Thank you so much.
Surprisingly, I don't think we have any journalists asking the questions. So if there are any journalists in the back or any other scholars who would be interested in asking some of the questions to the panelists, do we have any questions at the back? Okay. Okay, great. So we have Dr. Swasti, then Dr. Pulipaka.
Yeah, so the first question that was asked to me about, I think it had a lot of something like elitism and the great power rivalry being elitist, and then how does Indo-Pacific cater to the smaller powers? I mean, that was a sense of your question, something like that. I think, yeah, in many ways, it pretty much is the distillate of what I was trying to convey, which is that, yes, of course, I mean, when you look at the smaller powers, for example, the middle order powers that are from that region, for whom this region is relevant, leaving out countries like the US and China. Of course, this is what I mean when I say the great power rivalry and competition. I mean, they basically, even though they are not equidistant between US and China, this is important. I mean, India multi-aligns, but India's multi-alignment is not equidistant between US and China, right? I mean, it's not an equal distribution. We say it because we want to keep Asia multipolar. So, I mean, those are the kind of things that needs to be remembered when we are using these terms, because they are not to be used without their context and subtext. Now, having said that, I think it isn't in the interest, like keeping it short, it is in the interest of the middle order powers to not aid to, that militarization and all that danger, and try to find a different way. Now, when I look at France, because of course in Europe, France is the only country which is preeminently, in the Indo-Pacific. They have territory, they have regions, etc. They have people, they have EEZ, of course. So for them, I mean, if you look at how is the discourse on Indo-Pacific is emerging in France, I mean, everything is just about this one thing, that that they want to provide a third approach. Okay, now, of course, it can be problematized whether they have the military capabilities to provide a third approach, if they have the diplomatic heft. France is not doing very well in the Pacific island countries, etc. But having said that, the point that it wants to, kind of push for multipolarity, which is beyond the US-China rivalry. So that was the thing that I was trying to say. And I completely agree when you say that there is a whole host of countries that do not want to play or find themselves as pawns into this, military confrontation. And therefore, what do you talk about? You can talk about connectivity. Of course, connectivity is a very important thing. I did not talk about it today, but of course, there is an entire gamut of the global gateway projects which are happening. So I did not want to talk about everything at the same time. So in my presentation, if you remember, I said that I'm going to be talking specifically about these two things. It doesn't mean that the connectivity or the MOU on semiconductors or those projects are not important. Of course, they're very important. In fact, in 2024, I hope India will get a very like a big ticket global gateway announcement. So far, the only country they came closest to was Bangladesh, right? So, I mean, that's another thing. So I'm not saying that these things are not important, of course, but talking specifically about the security threats in the security domain, I refer to these, hybrid threats because the smaller countries do not have the capabilities and they are the most vulnerable, right? So what do you then do? Of course, you can't expect the smaller countries to come together because they would not have the heft, they would not have the capabilities, okay? And that was the entire logic. So in short, this is what I have to say. If you want to ask further, I mean, I'm sure you would have my email or something, you can drop an email. This is a huge project that I've been doing for the last many months. So there is a lot of detail here that I can't mention in 7-8 minutes, but I would be happy to share with you. With respect to Dr. Stuti Banerjee's question, you asked me how the EU, defines. Well, of course, one of the things you said that, it's basically France's definitions, which are, that's what I got a sense, right? That they are more. Yes, of course, that's logical. See, France has been a resident power. Of course, European Union is not a resident power. The European Union became interested in Indo-Pacific because of upholding the rules-based international order, because they can't really afford all that 40% of the trade that is going from the Malacca Strait to get to fall into, say, confrontation or a disruption. So it is basically the European Union is there to basically protect its economic interest, and because the economic interests are so dependent on the salience of communication, therefore the entire concept of maritime security, and then of course you have anti-piracy, etc., etc. With respect to your question particularly, well, I mean, EU defines any state or non-state actors that can exploit, the EU's vulnerabilities to its advantage as hybrid, I mean, by and large. But I think what is an important component out there is that they are, when they come to Indo-Pacific, and if you read their Indo-Pacific strategy, and by the way, let me also at the outset say that none of the Indo-Pacific strategies within the European partners actually is contradictory. They all complement each other. So you would not see that there are elements in France's Indo-Pacific strategy that contradict the EU's Indo-Pacific strategy. So that is an important thing to be remembered, okay? Having said that, the one thing that I wanted to focus on is that there is a realization that this vast space of Indo-Pacific, which is just so important to global supply chains, etc., are very susceptible to hybrid threats because it is an unregulated space. So for all practical purposes, one of the things that the EU is trying to push is to try and develop, co-develop norms and regulations around how to tackle the disruptive technologies. And they are very, very clear on the fact that they cannot be doing it alone. In fact, one of the most basic pillars of the new security architecture they are trying to put together after what has happened in Russia and Ukraine is that they are looking for partnerships everywhere in the world by which they can actually co-design and co-develop norms. And one of the things is around the disruptive tech. And that is why I sort of give it that kind of importance when I'm referring to their designing or, their thinking behind how to put together a center for hybrid threats. So the partnership point is very, very important. The regulations point is very, very important. But more than that, if I've still not answered your point, maybe we can discuss it later. But so this is what I can perhaps tell you at the outset.
Thank you. On Dr. Stuti Banerjee's question, yes, we are deeply concerned about the evolving Russia-China dynamic. There was a phase when we thought probably we can wean away Russia away from China, but the Ukraine war happened and the sanctions and everything, the Russia started moving towards China. So that's an area of concern that we do have. But nonetheless, I think we should also take a disaggregated view of it. What I mean by that, You take Bangladesh, for instance. Bangladesh today is now constructing 2 nuclear powered reactors, which Russia has invested. Now, let us assume if Russia has not come, China would have come in there. So since Russia was there, we are partnering with Bangladesh and Russia in building that nuclear power plant. While we have concerns about Russia-China dynamic, we have to take a disaggregated approach and see sometimes India-Russia partnership can also offset Chinese presence as it has happened in Bangladesh. So that's what I would say on the evolving Russia-China dynamic. But overall, I agree with you on the nature of how the Russia-China relationship is evolving. Last point on human security that was raised, and also about whether Indo-Pacific dynamic is power oriented. Foreign policy is about power for domestic economic growth and prosperity. Whether we are saying Huawei network should be used or not, it is also about generating employment opportunities in India with our own networks or friendly networks that are willing to generate. Similarly, if you're talking about establishing defense industries, it is not just about crude power. It is also about creating employment opportunities when you spend millions of dollars. And how do you create that employment within India? It is about creating opportunities, accessing resources at lower price in a fair way, in a positive way, and also accessing markets. So I wouldn't classify Indo-Pacific as some kind of a crude power construct at all. And for the first time after a really long time, we have a construct that is based on our name, the country's name, and we should be ready to embrace it and leverage it so that we can get positive economic benefits for our poor people. Thank you.
I can see Parmar sir smiling. I'm not giving you any more time. So we'll take 1 minute for each of the panelists if they have any major points that they would want to convey. Shrishti, would you start?
I don't have much to add to what I said earlier, but yeah, of course, I agree with Parmar sir, like you mentioned rightly, and I couldn't agree more than that, that among the ASEAN member states itself, they are not very clear about the whole concept of ASEAN centrality. And in fact, they released a new document again, besides the AOIP, which is the ASEAN Maritime Outlook again. So we have, it's like a continuous process which is ongoing, and they are more hyped about when India launches IPOI, and they mentioned about ASEAN centrality in the IPOI, India's IPOI. So definitely I agree with you that there should be more introspection on the whole term of ASEAN centrality. What is the whole concept about, at least from the Indian perspective, to define it more clearly, and to also get a view from each of the ASEAN member states, not just from one of it, but each of the states, like how exactly they see ASEAN centrality in the Indo-Pacific. So definitely to much more homework to do, I would say, regarding my own research. And to end with, when we are talking about the larger topic, as we discussed today, fantastic co-panelists I had. So the global strategic cooperation in the Indo-Pacific, when we are talking about that, how US and India can cooperate in a common field like Southeast Asia, then my selling point would be definitely first to go on infrastructure development, to work together. And that would be the key to have a much, I think, strengthened relations in the region itself. Thank you.
Okay. Anything, Swasti?
Well, I've spoken a lot too, but I would just, because it was it's a brilliant idea. I think we need to take that up. You mentioned the Lobito corridor. It is a PGII initiative, which is partnership and growth for infrastructure, investment. It's G7 initiative, and just like IMEC was also coming from there, Lobito corridor is coming from there too. Just very quickly, the problem. I think it's a wonderful idea to try and sort of leverage India Africa equation to sort of fit in there. You said it could be an alternative route as well. I think the only problem out there is that the PGII connectivity initiatives have a problem because they are not able to de-risk capital for investment right now. So they have plans, but the de-risking of capital is a problem because of COVID. And then after COVID, just as we were coming together, we had Russia, Ukraine, and then after Russia, Ukraine, we have Israel. So de-risking capital is the reason why these things are not able to fly, not because of the political will of the political logic. I think that's perfectly on point, and I would go with that. So that's it. And I think I've talked enough about Indo-Pacific, so I think everybody really knows what I have to share. Thank you.
Dinkar, any last point?
Just what Parmar said, I agree with you, sir. I guess broad-basing the relationship, you have your exercises now, and so many other things on other fronts. But now we're buying hardware, but probably now the next step is to actually take that, as you said, crossing that Rubicon now. And I guess we'll have to be more realistic in what we identify. Because, for example, DTTI failed because we identified the wrong stuff. We went with the low-hanging fruits, which no one actually wanted them. So it never took off. And BrahMos is great because it's something we needed it. So, I mean, we'd have to be realistic in identifying the right stuff as well.
I think with that, we'll all agree that we had an excellent panel and we learned a lot. I did. I think everyone did learn a lot. So please give a huge round of applause to our panelists.
Thank you, panelists. This has been very engaging and wholesome discussion that we had. And this was on broader lines of comprehensive geopolitical strategic goals and likewise. With this, now I would like to call upon Arnab Ganguly for his closing remarks.
In the rich discussion that we had, in the day, I would dare not summarize things, but rather I would, take some of the points that came up during the discussions. One of the important point is definitely the Indo-Pacific is not a homogeneous region. There are different threat perceptions, and when we are talking about threats, there are traditional and non-traditional threats. Having said that, the security architecture is still evolving for the region. And one of the important things that came up is whatever the security architecture that would emerge, it needs to be flexible, it needs to be robust, it needs to be inclusive, and most importantly, it should promote multipolarity. And in this regard, a very interesting, point came up in the first session, which is, the collaboration in the Red Sea is indeed very, very critical in ensuring, the model of securing trade routes in the Indo-Pacific region also. Well, we discussed ASEAN centrality and, a lot of clarity on the concept is still required. One important point that was discussed is the economic interest which binds the countries together. And if we are talking about economic opportunities, one of the things I would like to mention is how the Indo-US defense relation is impacting various economic and socio-economic parameters in India. And Hyderabad is probably one of the best examples of how the MSMEs are emerging. But also at the same time, it also demonstrates how the state governments could contribute to achieving national goals. That I think should be one of the important takeaways. And having said all this, this would not have been possible without the support we got from the US Embassy in New Delhi, with the US Embassy in Hyderabad, especially our Consul General, Ms. Jennifer Larson, Consul General US Consulate Hyderabad, Ms. Lynn Kunkel, spokesperson Hyderabad Consulate, Mr. Bashit Muhammad and his team at the US Consulate in Hyderabad, Mr. Salil Kader and his team at the Hyderabad Consulate, and Mr. Shomik Ghosh from the US Consulate in Kolkata. And last but not the least, Puru and his team for putting this together. And most importantly, thanks everyone. Thanks to all the panelists, to all the participants who made the discussion so rich, so engaging, so interesting for all of us. There's a lot of takeaways from this discussion. Personally, I've learned a lot from today. I'm sure all who are present here would have also liked it. With this, let me thank everyone for being here with us and helping us in making this today's workshop successful. Thank you. My last point is there's a post-workshop feedback form which has been circulated. I request everyone to please fill it up and submit it at the registration desk while going on. Thank you.